It's cold, so freezing cold. Jingning jolted awake from the bitter chill, every inch of her body throbbing uncomfortably. Her head ached, her throat burned, and every muscle screamed in agony. Frigid wind howled through the space, seeping into every crevice of her bones and sending violent shivers racking her frame. Wasn't it supposed to be summer? She strained to move her numb, frozen fingers, her mind slowly clearing. Fragments of memory surfaced. She'd been struck by a large truck on her way home from work. What on earth had happened then? Had someone rushed her to a hospital? Or was she in an operating room? Qingning forced her eyes open. The sky outside was murky and overcast, and a crushing loneliness washed over her, the kind that came from waking after an endless afternoon nap. Summoning every ounce of strength, she pushed herself upright and stared blankly at her surroundings. Contrary to her guesses, this was neither a hospital ward nor an operating room. It was an abandoned apartment. The space was completely bare, devoid of any furniture save for a broken table leg lying overturned in the corner. Worse still, the apartment itself was dilapidated beyond repair. The front door had long been torn down. The walls were stained black from smoke and fire, the ceiling charred with a massive gaping hole torn through it. She'd been lying on the floor right in the center of the room, not far from a floor-to-ceiling picture window. A tawny haze blurred everything beyond the glass. The aluminum window frame stood bare and jagged. All the panes were gone without a trace, as were the curtains. Only empty curtain tracks remained, silent proof that they had once hung there. Gusts of wind roared straight through the empty window frame, plunging the room into an icy freeze. Thick dust and a sharp sulfur stench hung heavy in the air, making her stomach churn. Qingning clamped a hand over her nose and coughed twice. Where exactly was this place? The dress she'd been wearing before the accident was gone, replaced without her knowing by a tattered cotton-padded jacket. It offered little warmth, riddled with rips along the hem and collar that exposed the thin polyester filling inside. Beneath it, she wore only flimsy sleep trousers, fabric far too lightweight to block the biting wind seeping in, which threatened to freeze her legs solid. On her feet, just one single sock, no shoes at all. Most eerie of all, despite being hit by a truck, her body bore nothing more than a handful of minor scrapes. Qingning held out her right hand. It was gaunt and bony, like a chicken's claw. She lifted her left hand and struggled to roll up the sleeve of her right arm. Her wrist, exposed, was thin as a hemp stalk, nothing but taut, shriveled skin stretched over bone. How could this be? She'd never been this emaciated. There were no mirrors in the room. Frantically patting her pockets, she felt a hard rectangular object tucked away. Her hands shook violently from the cold as she pulled it out, a folded slip of paper. A spark of hope flared in her chest. She turned her back to block the raging wind so the paper wouldn't blow away, then unfolded it without hesitation. Dense, messy handwriting scrawled across the page, as if jotted down in a desperate hurry. Squinting in the dim light, she managed to decipher the words. This world is lethally dangerous. Proceed with extreme caution until you learn its rules. You were not meant to die, so you've been granted a chance to transmigrate and survive here. I've secured a spatial pocket for you, your old home from your previous life, stocked with every supply you owned back then. The space has running water, electricity, and a strength reinforcement pill. May you endure well in this world. Transmigrate? The two words sent a deafening buzz ringing through her skull. So this gaunt, skeletal body of hers was the result of transmigration? This frame was emaciated and frail, clearly not her original body. She'd undergone soul transmigration, but into whom? She had no idea. Still, at least she was still a woman, not trapped in a man's body. Clutching the note, she scanned the run-down apartment. It was obvious no one had lived here for years, yet the paper itself was brand new. Who had sent her to this world? Who had left this message? She flexed her stiff, frozen limbs, stumbled to her feet, and shuffled along the wall toward the empty window frame, carefully craning her neck to peer outside. A thick, tawny fog blotted out sky and land alike, churning endlessly beyond the window. Visibility was crippled. She could barely make out anything 50 meters away, everything farther dissolving into an endless murky yellow blur. Ferocious wind slammed into the building, powerful enough to hurl a person off balance. Qingning stumbled backward until she reached the far corner of the room, then sank heavily to the floor. Her mind spun with panic. She had no clue how tall this building was, and the gale relentlessly sapped every last bit of warmth from her skin. She curled in on herself instinctively. All she wanted was to go home. She didn't want a second life, didn't want this chance at transmigration. None of it. Fresh out of university, she'd landed a coveted job everyone envied, busy but fulfilling. Her whole life had only just begun. Why had she been torn away, trapped in this desolate wasteland? How was anyone supposed to endure well in a world like this? Jingning buried her face in her hands and huddled in the corner of the room, hiding like an ostrich. The wind howled on, draining her body heat rapidly, her hands and feet turning numb with cold. Her thin sleep trousers were fit only for early autumn, completely useless against the bitter chill. Shuddering, she stood and slowly stepped away from the window. She had to get back home. She couldn't freeze to death here. In the short time she'd been distracted, the light had faded entirely, the sky sinking into a murky dusk as night loomed fast. She walked to the apartment's empty doorway and hesitated, freezing mid-step. The hallway wall directly opposite the door was peeling and stained, marked with several black handprints that looked eerily like dried blood. The corridor beyond lay swallowed in pitch black, as if some unseen, terrifying creature lurked within its shadows. The words on the note echoed in her head, "This world is lethally dangerous. Proceed with extreme caution until you learn its rules." After a moment's wavering, her stiff limbs carried her back inside the apartment. "I'll leave once dawn breaks," she resolved silently. Shivering, she took stock of the small apartment, a single main room, plus a tiny, pitch-black storage closet tucked to one side. A bathroom sat near the front door, its door long removed. The space inside was a wreck, cracked tile littered the floor, shattered marble countertops scattered everywhere, indistinguishable from a garbage heap. She pulled the crumpled note out again. The dim light made the script hard to read, yet the paper and ink were fresh, clearly written only moments ago. Who had left this message? If she could find them, would they unravel the secret of her transmigration? Her mind raced with questions. Just then, a soft scrabbling sound drifted down from the top of the window frame. It sounded like something crawling slowly, dragging itself along the wall. Every muscle in her body went rigid. She froze where she stood, holding her breath. The noise drew closer, finally stopping above the window. A grotesque, twisted hand slithered down and clamped tight around the aluminum frame. It bore a vague resemblance to a human hand, yet its skin was wrinkled and sagging, joints swollen and oozing thick pus. A split second later, a horrifying face poked out over the frame, staring straight at her with unblinking intensity. What a hideous visage it was. Not a single patch of intact skin remained on its face. Sallow, ashen flesh stretched taut over bulbous, lion-like bony protrusions. Sunken eye sockets held murky yellow orbs. Its nose had caved in completely, leaving nothing but a raw hollow cavity, and its mouth split wide all the way to its jawline, revealing loose black teeth and bleeding gums. What kind of monster was this? All the blood in Qingning's veins turned to ice. She realized now, when terror peaks, your voice dies entirely. She stumbled backward, her legs giving out, and crashed hard to the floor. The sharp thud echoed loudly in the silent room. The monster's yellow eyes locked onto her, fixated by the noise. Seated on the floor, she scrambled backward on her hands and knees. The creature had set its sights on her. A gurgling, rasping sound bubbled from its throat as it clung to the frame, hanging upside down, inching its way inside. As it descended, its full form came into view. Its body was gaunt as a skeleton, draped in tattered, filthy rags. Exposed skin bore a sickly ashen gray hue, its jagged spinal vertebrae protruding sharply through its flesh. Its lower limbs were crippled beyond repair, too withered, rotting branches dragging uselessly behind it. Though swollen and misshapen, its fingers possessed inhuman strength. It hung suspended by nothing but its grip on the frame, defying gravity as it pulled its body forward. Don't let it get inside. The thought crashed through her mind like thunder. Before she could process it, her body reacted on pure instinct. She scrambled across the floor toward the only makeshift weapon in the room, the broken table leg propped against the corner. At that exact moment, a deafening shriek ripped out from the window. The half-human monster seemed capable of thought. Spotting her dash for the table leg, it clamped its deformed hands tighter to the frame and quickened its crawl inward. Overwhelming terror unlocked a surge of desperate strength in her frail body. She threw herself at the wall, ignoring the pain of impact, and snatched the wooden leg in both hands at once. Without hesitation, she lifted the table leg high above her head. Driven by raw panic and the urge to survive, she charged the window and slammed the wood down hard onto the monster's clawed grip. Its fingers were warped and bloated. It shouldn't be able to hold the frame securely, she reasoned, striking with brutal precision. But the monster merely lifted one hand and blocked her blow effortlessly. It seized the table leg and wrenched it outward. Qiangning lost her balance, yanked violently toward the empty window. No, she screamed. The glassless frame yawned inches from her face. If the monster dragged her outside, she would plummet from the high rise to her death. She released her grip on the table leg, shoved hard against the aluminum frame, and threw herself backward onto the floor, narrowly avoiding a fatal fall. The metal frame wobbled, a faint cracking creak splitting the air. Above her, the monster swung the stolen table leg, aiming straight for her skull. In the blink of an eye, Qiangning kicked hard against the window frame and rolled inward across the floor, dodging the blow by a hair's breadth. Run! That was the only thought left in her mind. Abandoning all caution, she scrambled away from the window on all fours, then sprinted toward the front door. Whatever waited in the hallway, even fire and blades, was 100 times better than being torn apart by this beast inside the apartment. Yet she barely made it a few steps before a sharp snap echoed behind her, the window frame splitting clean apart. Whirling around in terror, she watched the aged, rusted aluminum frame give way completely, splintering into fragments. The monster, still clutching the table leg, tumbled downward with the broken metal, vanishing into the murky yellow fog below. A dull thud echoed up from the ground floor, and the creature's shrieks cut off entirely. Had she escaped? Qiangning stared blankly out the empty window, unable to believe she'd survived. After a long moment, she gasped for air and sank heavily to the floor. That had been far too close. One wrong move, and she would have been the monster's meal. Night fell fast in this world. In the span of those few minutes, darkness had swallowed everything. Would more monsters break into the apartment? Should she flee at once? Once her racing heart slowed enough to think, panic washed over her again. She struggled to her feet and glanced toward the empty front doorway. The hallway beyond was pitch black, gaping like a monster's open maw. She turned away from the door and walked toward the tiny storage closet, guided only by the faint haze seeping through the broken window. It was far too dark, and she carried nothing to light her way. Venturing outside blind would only make her easy prey. Better to hide somewhere safe first, figure out how to access the spatial pocket the note mentioned, then plan her next move. Her fingers were numb with frostbite as she felt her way along the wall, slipped inside the closet, and slammed the door shut behind her. Total darkness swallowed the space. She slid down to sit with her back pressed against the wooden door. Wind howled against the walls outside, and slowly, her frayed nerves steadied. Transmigration was an unchangeable fact, and she refused to die here. If that was the case, she would fight to live. This world is lethally dangerous. Curling into a tight ball, she wrapped her arms around her knees and tucked her hands into her jacket sleeves for warmth, replaying every word of the note in her head. I've secured a spatial pocket for you, your old home from your previous life, stocked with every supply you owned back then. Before transmigrating, she'd had 2 homes, a small studio apartment rented near her workplace, and the 2-story family house in her hometown where she'd grown up with her parents. She loved cooking and always kept fruit and snacks stocked. Both spaces would hold food supplies. If the note told the truth, opening the pocket would grant her warm clothes and a full meal. Her stomach rumbled loudly at the thought, and she licked her parched, cracked lips instinctively. Hunger and cold alike would vanish once she unlocked the space. The space has running water, electricity, and a strength reinforcement pill. She clung to the memory of the words. If they were real, she would have a lifeline to survive this desolate wasteland. But where exactly was this spatial pocket? Leaning against the closet door, she recalled all the transmigration novels she'd read. Spatial pockets came in countless forms, embedded in bracelets, hidden inside jade pendants. Some, however, were bound directly to the transmigrated person's soul. The note had not explained how to activate it, yet a common trope ran through all those stories. The solution was never far away. Given how deadly this world was, such a vital survival tool could not be overly difficult to unlock. Perhaps the pocket was bound to an object inside this apartment, requiring a drop of her blood to activate? In every novel, jade was the standard vessel for spatial magic. But there was no jade anywhere here. All she owned besides her ragged clothes was the slip of paper. The note. A flash of realization lit up her mind. She pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket, bit her fingertip open in the dark, and smeared her fresh blood across the page. Yet no miraculous shift, no glowing portal appeared as she'd hoped. This was not the way to open the space. She sat slumped against the closet door, clutching the useless note in her hand, listening to the wind howl outside, utterly at a loss. She'd escaped immediate hypothermia for now, but her body was far too weak to endure a full night sitting exposed to this frigid air. By dawn, she might not have the strength to stand. If she ventured out into the unbroken blackness, the deadly gales alone could kill her, not to mention the countless monsters lurking in the shadows, far too powerful for her to fight off in her current state. Was she doomed to wait here and die? Mid-wavering, footsteps echoed outside the closet door. Someone was coming? Qiangning jolted upright in terror. Or was it another new breed of monster? Shaking violently, she braced her entire weight against the door with her back, crumpled the note into a tight ball, and stuffed it into her mouth. The secrets written on that paper were too extraordinary to fall into anyone else's hands. She chewed the pulp thoroughly and forced it down her tight throat. The footsteps drew nearer, stopping directly outside the closet. A young male voice, high and youthful, carried through the wood. "Boss, there's nothing in this run-down building. Why'd we risk our necks coming all the way out here?" A second voice, deep and rumbling, replied, "A high-value sacrificial offering escaped Hope Base, and the reward's huge. This was her old apartment. We might find something worthwhile here." The footsteps halted right in front of the closet door, and the low voice called out sharply, "Will you come out willingly, or do we drag you out?" Qiangning stayed silent, pressed flat against the wood. She had no idea how they'd sensed her hiding inside, but their conversation alone made it clear they meant her harm. Knuckles rapped against the closet door. The speaker sounded certain she was trapped within. "Quit hiding." Qiangning swallowed hard, her mind racing a mile a minute. She had no clue who these people were, bounty hunters chasing the Hope Base reward, or hunters with some other agenda. Either way, frail and unarmed as she was, she stood no chance against them. Worse still, she could not shake the fear that she herself was the escaped sacrificial offering they spoke of. 2 more sharp knocks landed on the door. The men outside were growing impatient, and the young boy's voice piped up again, "Boss, let's just bash the door down." In that split second, Qiangning made up her mind and spoke. "What's the reward Hope Base is offering?" Her voice came out so hoarse it startled even herself. Her throat burned as if scraped raw by sandpaper, yet she forced herself to finish the sentence in a calm tone. In that brief span, she ran through every possible plan she could think of, only to realize her best bet was to claim the identity of the vital sacrifice Hope Base sought. She had just transmigrated to this world and knew almost nothing about it. Every detail around her spoke volumes. The murky yellow fog hanging thick in the air, monsters that attacked without warning, and dilapidated, crumbling buildings all pointed to one brutal truth. This was a world ruled by the law of the jungle. The weak rarely survived crossing paths with the strong. A high-value sacrifice, however, was a different matter. It meant she would not suffer cruel, inhumane treatment before being formally handed over to Hope Base. The leader outside the door replied swiftly, "Supplies enough to reach U-City Safe Zone." U-City Safe Zone, another unfamiliar term. Qiangning silently memorized the name and went on, "Let's strike a deal." Silence hung outside for a beat, then came the response, "Speak." This was her chance. Her heart thudded wildly against her ribs. She had no idea why they hadn't kicked the door down immediately, but their willingness to talk was far better than a blind attack. Clasping her hands tight, she reined in her excitement and continued in that rough yet steady voice. "I can give you supplies sufficient to get to U-City Safe Zone on one condition: don't hand me over." No answer came from outside. The next instant, a massive force slammed the door open, sending Qiangning rolling across the floor several times over. Warm yellow torchlight flooded in. Dim as it was, it stung her eyes, unaccustomed to light after so long in darkness. She lifted a hand to shield her gaze and stared toward the storage room doorway. A slender teenage boy stood there holding the torch, swathed head to toe in thick, tattered clothes. A homemade cloth mask and goggles covered his face, his garments stained with mud and grime, patched all over. Behind him loomed a tall man, undoubtedly the leader who'd spoken to her moments ago. Like the boy, he was wrapped in bulky patched layers, mask and beat-up goggles obscuring his features completely. The two blocked the doorway entirely, and deeper darkness stretched out behind them. Only 2 of them. Relief washed over Qiangning for a heartbeat, then anxiety crashed right back down. They had rejected her terms and resorted to brute force instead, a clear sign negotiations had failed. Her body was weak, and she knew nothing of this dangerous world. The road ahead would be treacherous. By torchlight, the boy sized up her disheveled, fallen form from head to toe, contempt thick in his tone. "Look at the state you're in. How dare you claim you've got supplies to hand over?" Qiangning said nothing, pushing through the stinging scrapes on her skin to sit upright. The bargain she'd thrown out hinged entirely on unlocking her spatial storage first. Worse still, she had no clue what Hope Base was, what fate awaited that so-called vital sacrifice, or how far you city safe zone lay from here. Her reckless promise had only been a ploy to buy time. If they agreed, she would gain precious minutes to uncover the transmigrator's golden finger, her spatial storage. Once she accessed it, honoring her word would be trivial. Now, though, she lifted her gaze to the two figures swaddled like lab escapees, uncertainty gnawing at her chest. They were far more violent than she'd anticipated, impossible to fool easily. Had they accepted her offer, she could have lied that the supplies were hidden elsewhere, taking a desperate gamble to unlock her space in record time. But now the leader stepped past the boy and strode inside, a blade clutched in his hand. Its sharp edge glinted cold under the torch fire. Before Qiangning could react, the knife's edge pressed hard against her throat. The leader leaned down, staring at her through his goggles, his tone stripped of all prior calm, frigid now. "Tricks won't work on me. I have no wish to harm anyone, but Aki and I have to make it to you city safe zone. So you'll run for us one more time." "Wait." The icy blade dug into her neck, sending a shudder down her spine. She blurted out frantically, "Don't you want those supplies?" The leader hung his head, his gaze boring into hers through smudged goggles. Beneath the torchlight, his irises held a sickly yellow hue, instantly reminding her of the monster she'd encountered before nightfall. "I want them, of course, but I don't trust a word you say." He spoke slowly, unhurried. "Trading with Hope Base is dancing with a tiger, but a base stocked with massive resources is far more reliable than you." Qiangning flinched and fell silent. Every extra word risked exposing her lie. She was only pretending to be their sought sacrifice. One careless slip of the tongue would seal her doom, leaving no room for regret. Clearly, making up believable lies took talent. The leader gestured to the boy, who jammed the torch into the door crack, unspooled a rope from his waist, and walked toward her. Qiangning ground her teeth and did not struggle. She had foreseen this possibility the moment she decided to impersonate the sacrifice they hunted. Besides, the struggles of the weak meant nothing to those stronger than them. If she intended to fight back, she would wait for the perfect opening to strike once and for all. The boy moved fast, patting down her pockets and every crevice where items might be hidden before binding her tight with rope. Her wrists were lashed behind her back, the cord digging painfully into her flesh. Before she could whimper from the pain, a reeking tattered rag was stuffed roughly into her mouth. Next, the leader hoisted her up like a helpless chick and tossed her over one shoulder. Her soft midsection slammed hard against his shoulder. The brutal impact tearing hot tears from her eyes as cold sweat streamed down her face. By the time she recovered her senses, the boy had retrieved the torch from the doorframe and led the way ahead. They exited the apartment. Dangling upside down over the leader's shoulder, Qiangning fought back nausea to study her surroundings carefully. Outside the apartment stretched a wrecked corridor. Shattered brick and stone littered the floor, the walls no better off, sections of plaster peeled away. Others stained with dark splotches that might well be blood, casting an eerie, terrifying aura in the dim torch glow. The leader and the boy moved at a rapid pace and soon reached the stairwell. Glancing upside down at the staircase from her dangling position, a wave of icy dread shot straight from her soles to the crown of her head. It was horrifying. Where full flights of stairs should have stood, only jagged broken slabs remained, dropping into an unfathomable black void. Fractured steps jutted out over gaping floor drops like cliff edges, twisted steel rebars protruding from shattered concrete as sharp as jagged blades. How had they climbed up here? And how did they plan to get down? Sweat poured down Qiangning's temples. She whimpered against the gag and twisted frantically on his shoulder. Fighting to break free. Even in this world where death lurked around every corner, she refused to perish this way. "Stay still." The leader smacked her hard across the rear, then set her down off his shoulder. A few feet away, the boy had already secured a thumb-thick rope to a sturdy-looking steel rebar. He clamped the torch between his teeth, leaped forward with the agility of an ape, and slid swiftly down the rope. The flickering firelight wavered and faded into the murky fog. Qiangning collapsed against the stairwell entrance, her heart hammering with lingering terror. This was their way down? Had they climbed up the same rope earlier? The leader dragged another coil of rope out of nowhere and began wrapping it around her waist. Once the bindings were secure, he delivered a sudden kick, sending the unprepared Qiangning plummeting downward. This can't be happening was her only thought as she fell. The world spun violently. Sudden weightlessness sent her heart surging into her throat, her stomach churning violently upward. Frigid wind howled shrilly in her ears, screaming nonstop. Mid-free-fall, consumed by paralyzing terror, a blinding white light flared before her eyes. Far too radiant to bear. In a haze, the old village house she'd lived in before transmigrating materialized vividly in front of her. Was this the spatial storage or a deathbed hallucination? Qiangning stood frozen in the center of the living room, staring blankly at everything around her. Soft lamplight spilled over the room. The floor was lined with off-white ceramic tiles, spotlessly clean, laid 2 years prior during her family's renovation. A liquid crystal television hung on the wall, a deep crimson TV cabinet sitting beneath it. Facing the TV, a set of light gray fabric sofas leaned against the wall, a floral cotton throw draped over one armrest. The glass-topped coffee table glinted in the light. Her parents had refused to replace it years ago, fond of its solid wood frame despite its outdated design. A sheet of protective glass sat atop it to shield the wood finish, now catching the room's glow. She remembered the note's words. "I secured a spatial storage for you. It's your old home from before you transmigrated." So, this was the storage space. After narrowly escaping death, she'd stumbled inside by pure chance? Before she could process the revelation, a brutal jolt slammed into her waist. The living room of her old house vanished. She was back in the stairwell, halted mid-fall by the rope tied around her waist. Her mind went utterly blank. Waves of dizziness crashed over her, and she retched uncontrollably. The rope began lowering her steadily, yet Qiangning could no longer calm her racing thoughts. Sorrow and burning rage welled up inside her, flooding her mind. She'd only been in a car accident, yet somehow woken up transmigrated into this hellish world. Disaster had chased her nonstop ever since. Now trapped in the hands of these 2 men, she'd thought her life would be safe until they handed her over to Hope Base. But now she had no certainty left. And the golden finger that could set her free eluded her entirely. What had become of this world? What must she do to survive its dog-eat-dog cruelty? Was she doomed to surrender to fate? Just then, that searing white light blazed before her eyes once more, and she found herself standing in her old living room again. Had that not just been a hallucination? Why was it reappearing? The phantom of her childhood home solidified, blotting out the stairwell's blackness, leaving her standing once more in the middle of the room. Disbelieving, Qiangning rubbed her eyes hard and studied every detail again. She stepped to the coffee table and brushed her palm over the glass top. Cool, smooth texture seeped into her fingertips. It was real. The table, the living room, the entire old house, all tangible. She'd unlocked the spatial storage and escaped inside. Suppressing surging excitement, her gaze landed on a wooden box resting atop the coffee table. It looked heavy and ancient, 3 carved characters etched deep into its lid, strengthening pills. These were the strengthening pills? She lost all control of her emotions, lunging forward to snatch the box into her grasp. The wood felt warm beneath her palms, the box weighty in her hands. She flipped it open without hesitation, grabbed one of the pills, and lifted it to her mouth. Yet with a soft clink, the pill passed straight through her body and clattered onto the floor. What on earth was going on? Qiangning froze in shock. She picked the black round pill off the ground, twisting it back and forth in her palm to examine it closely. It was glossy black and smooth, roughly the size of a longan fruit. It rolled easily between her fingers, warm with a faint soft give. She could hold it without trouble, so why couldn't she swallow it? She turned the pill over repeatedly, utterly confused. Suddenly, her gaze locked on her own hands, and realization hit her like a punch. She'd been bound tight with rope before entering the space. She shook her head hard, grasping the critical missing piece. Why had all the ropes vanished the moment she stepped into the storage space? Glancing down at the sandals on her feet, she sprinted to the entryway full-length mirror. Her reflection stared back, clean, gaunt no longer, dressed in a sky-blue sundress with long hair neatly tied back. It was exactly how she'd looked before transmigrating. Qingning was about to test the space further when a hand slapped lightly against her cheek, a voice cutting through the haze. "Wake up." The leader's voice, distant and fuzzy. The boy's tone followed right after. "No way. She just fainted from a simple stair descent?" As their voices sharpened into clarity, the vision of her old house melted away like receding tides, replaced by harsh reality. She remained in the stairwell, its lowest floor this time. Shattered staircase slabs from the levels above had crashed down to pile into a mountain of rubble. She hung suspended by rope, bound hand and foot atop the debris pile, her arms twisted painfully behind her back and crushed beneath her weight. She tensed to shift position, then froze, balling her fists tight. She'd brought the strengthening pill out of the storage space with her. She darted a nervous glance at the leader and the boy, one squatting, one standing, both watching her closely. The leader noticed nothing amiss and exhaled in relief. "Good, she's awake. We need her alive to trade for supplies." He hoisted Qingning back over his shoulder and headed out of the ruined building, the boy trailing behind, torch clutched in one hand and a small blade gripped tight in the other, perpetually vigilant. They wove through broken streets, passing rows of buildings mangled beyond recognition. They scrambled over collapsed concrete barriers and reached a stretch of crumbling walls. Judging by the skeletal frame, this had once been a lavish office skyscraper, now a ruin. A towering high-rise reduced to only 3 standing floors. Where glass curtain walls had once shown, only bare support beams and columns remained. The empty entrance gaped wide like a monster's maw, waiting to swallow everything that crossed its path. Carrying Qingning, the leader stepped over shards of marble and glass littering the ground, marching straight into that gaping void. The building's interior was far more dilapidated than the exterior. Shattered tile and concrete chunks from collapsed walls and ceilings carpeted the floor, the entire lobby propped up by rickety support columns that looked ready to crumble at any second. He moved with practiced familiarity toward what used to be the elevator bank. This area fared slightly better than the lobby. Though loose broken marble slabs littered the floor, the walls remained intact, offering a modicum of safety. The elevator protective doors were long gone, the pitch-black shaft a yawning dark mouth dropping endlessly downward. The leader set Qingning down beside the elevator opening, ordering the boy to stand guard, then jumped straight into the shaft. A clattering echo rose from below, and soon the leader's voice drifted upward. "Aki, lower her down." Not again. Memories of the terrifying fall left Qingning trembling. She tried to cry out in protest. The gag stuffed in her mouth muffled every sound. She shook her head wildly, pleading eyes locked on the boy. Whether the boy named Aki's conscience stirred, or her earlier faint during the descent spooked them, he sighed and hauled the rope to lower her slowly into the elevator shaft. Whether years of grueling labor had gifted him superhuman strength or humans in this world possessed extraordinary physical constitutions, he held the rope solely with his 2 hands, lowering Qingning at a smooth, steady pace without a single jolt. After what felt like an eternity, she touched the shaft's bottom floor. The leader waited there with the torch, stepping forward to steady her and guide her safely onto solid ground. A scraping rattle echoed from overhead steel cables. Qingning craned her neck upward to see Aki, torch clamped between his teeth, sliding down an elevator cable anchored somewhere 3 stories above. Before she could watch longer, the leader hauled her away from the shaft. Behind them, Aki leaped off the cable and hurried to catch up. Dim torchlight illuminated the underground expanse, scarred with widespread collapse. Twisted steel rebar and fragmented concrete covered every surface, broken metal rods jutted out at jagged, threatening angles. Stacked monolithic floor slabs formed a narrow winding path barely wide enough to walk along. The leader carried Qingning down the makeshift trail and halted before a rusted fire door. Its lock appeared broken. Aki stepped forward with the torch, quickly dismantling crude locking mechanisms to swing the door open. They slipped inside in one fluid motion, and the leader slammed the door shut behind them in an instant. Only then did the leader and Aki finally relax their guard. The boss set Qingning down on the ground and lit an oil lamp. Achi extinguished the torch, dimming the room. Only the faint yellow glow of the oil lamp illuminated this tiny shelter. Qingning wriggled on the floor, shifting into a more comfortable position as she cautiously scanned her surroundings. It was a small room less than 20 square meters. The floor was smooth and clean, free of loose rubble, far neater and warmer than the outside world. Cracks spiderwebbed the walls, yet the structure as a whole remained intact. Against the far wall stood several huge metal filing cabinets, originally meant for office documents. Bathed in the oil lamp's dim light, they looked like coffins. To the left of the room stood a single vertical metal cabinet with its door tightly shut, its contents a mystery. Beside it sat a foldable metal table, upon which rested the oil lamp. Stacked against the right wall were several plastic stools, identical to those used at street food night markets. Though the space was filled entirely with metal and plastic furnishings, it exuded an inexplicable sense of warmth. Qiangning's gaze drifted from the coffin-like cabinets to the lamplight on the table, then to the stools, finally settling on a map taped to the wall. The map was frayed from countless close inspections, covered in hand-drawn circles and arrows of varying sizes. This was clearly not the Hope Base the boss had mentioned, more likely their private living shelter. They'd planned to trade her for supplies at Hope Base, so why bring her here first? Her hands bound behind her back, Qiangning clenched her fists, overcome with unease. The boss opened one of the horizontal metal cabinets on the floor, spun around, grabbed the rope tying Qiangning, and dragged her toward it. Wait! Qiangning wanted to shout, but a cloth gag stuffed her mouth, leaving her only able to let out muffled whimpers. The boss possessed immense strength. He lifted her bodily and shoved her inside the cabinet. Stay put, he muttered lowly, then slammed the metal cabinet door shut. A sharp click echoed as the lock engaged, swallowing everything in darkness. The boss's steady voice drifted through the metal. Qi, let's go. We'll negotiate with Hope Base. Hopefully we'll get enough supplies this time. So they intended to strike a deal before handing her over. Qiangning pricked up her ears, feeling a flicker of relief. Once the two left, she'd be alone. That window of time would give her a chance to act. No. Qi's voice cracked with agitation. I refused to trade her for supplies. What was this? The two weren't as unified as they seemed? As Qiangning analyzed their dynamic, she racked her brain for a way to access her storage space again. It was fortunate the reinforcement pill had accidentally come out with her, yet her current predicament left her helpless, hands bound behind her back, mouth gagged with cloth. Without breaking free of these restraints, the pill would be useless even if she held it. Outside the cabinet, their argument raged on. The boss's firm tone cut through the metal. This is my final decision. The apocalypse has dragged on for 3 years. Supplies in Ningqing grow scarcer by the day. This is our last shot. If we fail to secure enough provisions, both of us will rot away here. I won't go to the safe zone, Qi's voice wavered with sobs. What will become of you, boss, if I leave? You've been sick for far too long. We'll run out of time to treat you soon. I won't let you turn into a monster. The apocalypse? A sickness that twists people into monsters? Qiangning jolted in shock. She'd suspected the world had fallen to ruin, yet hearing the word apocalypse spoken aloud stripped away her composure entirely. Images flashed through her mind, crumbling apartment blocks, scattered concrete and stone rubble, the perpetual yellow haze choking the air, and the monster that had unexpectedly broken into her apartment shortly after she arrived. Novels depicted countless apocalypse scenarios, zombie outbreaks from viral infections, climate catastrophes triggering extreme weather, even game like Worlds governed by digital stats. What kind of disaster had befallen this world she'd transmigrated into? A viral plague? Yet the scale of collapsed buildings didn't align with that theory. Setting aside her attempts to unlock her storage space, she strained to listen intently to their debate. Every scrap of truth about this apocalypse she could glean from their conversation would be invaluable. A hint of helplessness crept into the boss's voice. Do you think I don't want to cure you? This is the end of the world. There are no reliable medical treatments left anywhere. Hope Base has curative serum. Qi refused to back down. The boss fell silent for a long moment before speaking slowly. You were too young 3 years ago to grasp the full horror of the Great Cataclysm. It wasn't just 1 or 2 lives lost, hundreds of thousands perished. Rows of skyscrapers collapsed, volcanic ash blotted out the sun, and tsunamis surged all the way inland to Ningqing. Qi, we no longer have hospitals. Any surviving doctors lost all their medical equipment. They couldn't possibly develop a cure for marrow rot disease in such a short span of time. I don't believe you. Qi roared furiously, delivering a violent kick to the metal cabinet holding Qiangning. A deafening crash reverberated through the room. That woman locked inside spent 3 years in Hope Base's laboratory, didn't she? The kick sent a violent shockwave through Qiangning, making her scalp tingle and her ears ring. She fought the urge to kick back at the cabinet wall, desperate to hear more. But the reverberation of the blow lingered, muffling their voices. By the time the ringing faded enough for her to hear clearly, their argument was drawing to a close. All she caught was a Chi's muffled weeping, the boss's heavy sigh, and a single line, "Let's go." Footsteps echoed one after the other, followed by the creak of the fire door opening and shutting. Silence descended. Trapped inside the metal cabinet, Qiangning bit back a string of curses, forcing slow, deep breaths. She had no idea what critical information she'd missed, yet what she'd overheard was more than enough to shake her to the core. The note she'd found earlier had been vague and cryptic. It claimed this world was deadly, but it was a full-blown apocalypse. Viruses, man-eating monsters, frigid temperatures, and total collapse of law and order. No wonder her transmigration gift included a storage space stocked with supplies, plus a reinforcement pill. In her feeble, battered body after crossing over, she would not have survived without any one of those lifelines. She wondered who had left the note, and why they'd skimped so much on the storage space. She couldn't even hide inside it to escape danger. Clutching the reinforcement pill tight in her palm, she gritted her teeth and closed her eyes, trying to activate the storage space. Complaining solved nothing. The boss and Chi were only gone temporarily. Their return would mark the real trial. The 2 previous times she'd unlocked the space had been accidental, triggered by surging emotion. This time, she resolved to summon it through sheer focus. As she concentrated her energy, the old house materialized before her eyes. Moments later, Qiangning stood once more in its living room. She lifted her hand to stare at the reinforcement pill clutched in her right palm. The black, Longan-sized pellet was slick with sweat from her nervous grip. The reinforcement pill had truly traveled outside the storage space with her. Confirmation of this eased her anxieties. When she'd realized her physical form stayed trapped outside the space while her consciousness entered, she'd feared the note had lied. If she couldn't retrieve items from storage, the space would be useless. Now that worry was laid to rest. The supplies stored within were accessible to her. The only catch was that her body could not enter the space to seek shelter. Worse still, she needed a relatively safe environment to summon items, lest she be attacked mid-process and killed. After sorting through her thoughts, she popped the reinforcement pill back into her mouth. Her first attempt had failed, yet she refused to give up. If she could swallow the pill inside the space and complete the body reinforcement there, it would save her the trouble of cutting free her bindings first. Her second try ended in failure too. The pill clattered to the wooden floor. Fine then. Qiangning silently picked up the pellet and placed it back into its original wooden casket. Her top priority now was finding a tool to sever the ropes binding her wrists. She turned toward the kitchen and rummaged through the cabinets with practiced ease, retrieving a foldable fruit knife. Next, she needed to leave the storage space. The prior 2 exits had been involuntary, jolted out by outside disturbances. Now that the boss and Chi were gone, leaving her alone in the metal cabinet, how would she return to the real world? As she puzzled over the method, the kitchen scenery around her began to fade, swallowed by the cabinet's inky blackness. She was thrust back into the metal box. She remained tightly bound in an agonizing position, only the reinforcement pill she'd held earlier replaced by the fruit knife from the kitchen. Shifting awkwardly, she strained to unfold the blade, twisting her arms behind her back to saw steadily at the ropes around her wrists. Just then, banging erupted from the direction of the fire door. Had the boss and Chi returned already? So soon? A chill ran down Qiangning's spine. Ignoring the burning pain in her wrists, she sawed the rope faster, pushing her limits. The noise from the fire door persisted, shifting from heavy thuds to gnawing and scraping. She kept sawing while listening closely. Whatever lurked outside possessed immense strength, judging by the force of its impacts. A shudder rippled through her as she thought of the monster she'd encountered right after transmigrating. Suddenly, the rope binding her wrists slackened. Freedom! Suppressing her surge of excitement, she wriggled free of the restraints. Her wrists were swollen numb from being tied. Now that her arms moved again, a sharp, stinging pain spread through her limbs and torso, as if thousands of tiny needles pricked her skin. She ached to pause and recover, yet the gnawing at the fire door continued. Time was short, she had to act fast. Ignoring the peril outside, she closed her eyes to re-enter the storage space. In the apocalypse, physical strength meant survival. She needed to take the reinforcement pill immediately. She repeated the name of the pill in her mind, desperately visualizing the old house. But the familiar white light never appeared. Instead of entering the storage space, an object materialized in her grasp. Total darkness engulfed the metal cabinet. She ran her fingers over the new item in her palm, round, Longan-sized, identical to the reinforcement pill. She lifted it to her nose and inhaled a faint medicinal aroma. Squeezing it gently, she recognized its smooth, warm texture, sticky with the sweat from her earlier grip. It was definitely the reinforcement pill. Without hesitation, she tossed it into her mouth and swallowed hard, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She didn't need to enter the space to retrieve items after all. She intended to test pulling out more supplies, yet the reinforcement pill's effects crashed over her at that exact moment. A warm current bloomed in her dantian before exploding, splitting into countless tiny streams of heat that surged through every limb and organ. Agony washed over her, unbearable agony. The needle-like stinging from her cut-off circulation amplified 100-fold, as if thousands of silver needles drove deep into her flesh. A maddening itching followed the sharp pain, far worse than any ordinary wound. Qiangning tried to thrash, yet her body went limp, completely immobile. The gnawing sounds from the fire door echoed deafeningly, like a knife scraping harshly across glass. A splintering crack cut through the air, followed by the high-pitched creak of the fire door swinging open. Whatever was outside had gotten in. Enduring the searing torment of the reinforcement process, she strained to track the creature's movements outside the cabinet. It appeared to be a four-legged crawler. It circled the room once, then scuttled straight toward the metal cabinet holding her. The reinforcement pill's transformation continued raging through her system. She struggled to summon a weapon from storage, but failed repeatedly. Every slight movement sent fresh stabs and itching rippling through her frame, robbing her of all strength. Would she die trapped in this room? In that desperate instant, she almost found herself longing for the boss and Ichi. Though they meant her harm, they were at least human, people she could reason with. Their only plan had been to trade her for supplies at Hope Base. But this thing creeping outside? She had no idea what it was. If it hungered for human flesh, her paralyzed state left her as helpless as canned meat. The creature snuffled loudly, seemingly catching her scent. It clambered onto the metal cabinet and began gnawing at the door. Sharp teeth scraped against steel, releasing a shrill, ear-splitting whine. "I'm going to die." Faced with mortal danger, the pain of the reinforcement faded entirely from her awareness. Her mind went taut as she frantically called for the storage space and any weapon within it. At the same time, she curled her fingers tight, fighting to regain control of her body. Rage flared toward the boss and Ichi. Why hadn't they taken her straight to Hope Base instead of locking her alone in this pitch-black underground shelter about to be devoured by some unknown beast? Most of all, she blamed herself. Now that she knew she could pull items directly from storage, she should have grabbed weapons to escape first. Why had she swallowed the pill without a second thought? If only I could move, if only I could move. The creature seemed to sense her terror, speeding up its gnawing. The screech of teeth on metal drilled into her skull, making her head throb. A deafening crunch split the air, the cabinet wall had been pierced. A putrid stench wafted through the jagged hole. Goosebumps erupted all over Qiangning's body. The horror of the moment overwhelmed her. The monster was inches away, yet darkness blinded her to its form. Thick, slimy, reeking fluid dripped through the hole onto her face. She burned to wipe it off, yet could not lift a hand. Her emotions snapped. Fueled by white-hot rage, she regained control of her limbs and slammed a kick hard against the cabinet door. A thunderous clang reverberated through the basement. The gnawing halted. The creature outside appeared startled, but a shrill squeal rang out a second later, followed by the sound of metal being torn open above her. It's enraged. The cry sounded eerily like a rat, yet no rat could grow this large. Every hair on Qiangning's body stood on end. She whispered frantically for a knife, a lamp, patting every inch of the cramped cabinet in a blind search. If she could not freely summon weapons from storage, she would have to rely on whatever she had on hand to fend off the beast. A heap of discarded rope lay at her feet, the bindings the boss had used, the one she'd sawed through earlier. Sawed through. A sudden thought struck her. She fumbled inside the tattered pocket of her cotton jacket and pulled out the foldable fruit knife. Darkness still shrouded everything. She could not see a thing, yet once she flipped the blade open, she swung it hard in the direction of the creature's noises, guided by sound and stench. The blade sank into something soft yet tough. She bore down and sliced cleanly through. A blood-curdling shriek echoed through the darkness and warm, iron-scented liquid splattered across her cheeks. She paid no mind to wiping it away. "I hit it." Elated, she slashed repeatedly toward the cabinet door. This time, her blade met nothing but empty air. The creature that had climbed atop the cabinet and torn a hole in its wall had retreated. A headlamp sat in her storage space, if only she could pull it out. The thought had barely crossed her mind when a headlamp materialized in her grasp. Overcome with relief, she flicked it on and shone its beam toward the cabinet door. Blinding headlamp light flooded everything before her. A huge hole had been gnawed through the sheet metal cabinet door overhead. Beyond the hole, a pair of mung bean-sized eyes glinted with vicious malice, staring straight at her. It was a rat, sure enough. It must have planned to sneak in under cover of darkness, but the sudden flash of light blinded it. It let out a shrill squeak and spun around to flee. Qiangning strapped the headlamp to her forehead, pushed herself halfway upright, and peered out through the chewed opening. The rat had vanished without a trace. The basement was shrouded in pitch blackness, and she could just make out a crack in the fireproof door. She shoved the sheet metal cabinet door hard, yet it would not budge. She hesitated for a moment, recalling all the supplies she'd kept at home before her transmigration. "I've secured a spatial pocket for you. It's your old residence from before you crossed over, holding every single item you owned back then." She'd swallowed the slip of paper bearing those words, yet every line remained etched crystal clear in her mind. This headlamp was one of her father's night fishing tools. He'd been an avid angler in her past life. If her dad's gear had come through with her, that meant every tool from her old house had traveled across worlds alongside her. Did that mean she could retrieve anything she'd ever owned at will? Qiangning mulled it over, then pulled a hatchet out of the old house's spatial pocket. The stinging, tingling aftereffects of the physical enhancement had faded completely. She hefted the hatchet high and swung it hard at the cabinet's lock. A deafening clang of metal on metal rang out, and the sheet metal cabinet creaked open. Qiangning pushed the door wide and clambered out of the coffin like horizontal metal storage unit. The headlamp's harsh glow swept across the basement. The rat had not gone far. It cowered in the corner, its tiny crimson eyes fixed on her with unbridled ferocity. Qiangning had never seen a rat this massive. Its body stretched nearly half a meter long, trailed by a thin, whip-like tail. Its right front paw appeared injured, oozing blood and hanging limp at its side. That must have been why it hadn't lunged at her immediately. But what unsettled her most was its grotesque condition. Large patches of fur had sloughed off, revealing sickly bluish-purple skin beneath, with festering white rot spreading across its body. Yellow-green pus seeped from the corners of its mouth. Qiangning watched it warily, stowing the hatchet back into her space and drawing a long watermelon knife instead. From what she remembered, rats were lightning-fast creatures. Even wounded, their speed was nothing to underestimate. Yet this mutated rodent stirred a terrible memory, the humanoid monster she'd encountered back in the apartment complex. That beast had possessed inhuman strength. If luck hadn't intervened, snapping the aluminum window frame and sending it plummeting to its death, she would have lost her life that day. Human and mutant rat stood locked in a tense stalemate. Then the rat struck. Thankfully, its injuries slowed its movements. Qiangning seized the opening, slashing her blade down hard into the rat's skull. Squeak! A piercing shriek split the air, and the rat twisted to bolt toward the exit. Qiangning sprinted after it, hacking again and again until the creature collapsed lifeless on the concrete. She tore the tattered rag, gagging her mouth free, gasped for air, and stumbled several paces backward. Girls raised in peaceful eras almost universally feared rats, cockroaches, and the like, and Qiangning was no exception. She hated rats. Worse still, this beast was nearly mutated in size, its body covered in rotting flesh. At first, she hadn't registered its horrid appearance in the dark. Later, the mounting tension of their standoff had drowned out her fear. Now, staring at the rat's corpse, roughly the size of a small dog, unease crawled up her spine. The confrontation had drenched her in cold sweat. Dried rat saliva and blood coated her cheeks, dripped from the creature overhead while she'd been trapped in the cabinet. She wiped her face roughly with the frayed sleeve of her tattered jacket. After swallowing the enhancement pill, her stamina had surged dramatically. Where she'd once gasped for breath after only a few steps, her body now felt sturdy and steady. Even her once gaunt, bony arms had filled out, lined with new muscle mass. The only downside was a ravenous hunger. Her empty stomach burned as if lit from within. Qiangning recalled her mother's habit of stocking milk at home. She pulled a carton from her spatial pocket and drained it in 2 gulps. Her parched throat and gnawing hunger eased instantly. Glancing down at her threadbare clothes, she considered the bitter cold of this apocalyptic world and the constant crawling, scrambling danger she faced. Without hesitation, she pulled a full set of cotton-padded jacket and trousers from her space and changed into them. After lacing up sturdy boots, she slipped her original ragged cotton coat over the top as an extra layer. With the cold taken care of, she pulled out a pack of crackers and chewed slowly, her gaze drifting to the map pinned to the wall. She unhooked the map, rolled it tight, and stowed it in her space. Next, she tried shifting the heavy sheet metal cabinet to test her current strength. The result disappointed her. Even after enhancement, her physical power matched that of an average grown man at best. Disheartened, she carefully stepped around the rat's corpse and headed toward the fireproof door. This basement was far from safe. Boss and Achi could return at any moment, and where one mutated rat lurked, more would follow. She needed to escape fast. The headlamp's glow dimmed noticeably, warning Qi Yingning its battery was dying. She quickened her pace, navigating the winding tunnels by memory toward the elevator shaft. This underground complex had partially collapsed long ago, a chaotic, labyrinthine warren of crumbling passages fraught with peril. Even with the headlamp lighting her way and the enhancement pill boosting her physique, progress remained agonizingly slow. She took several wrong turns down branching corridors. When the headlamp's light faded to a faint flicker, she finally reached the elevator shaft she'd used to get down here. A thunderous crash suddenly echoed from the shaft, shaking the entire basement to its foundations. The already unstable, collapsed, damaged ceiling poured loose concrete rubble down like shifting sand. Years of navigating danger had sharpened her reflexes. Qi Yingning dodged several large chunks of falling concrete, darted behind a thick concrete slab for cover, and clicked the headlamp off entirely. Only once the shower of gravel ceased did she cautiously peek out toward the elevator shaft. Flickering torchlight spilled out from the opening, shadowy figures moving faintly in the glow. Had Boss and Achi returned? Or had new intruders stumbled into the basement? Qi Yingning pressed flat against her cover, holding her breath, every muscle rigid as she fixed her eyes on the distant light. Two men stepped out of the shaft, one tall, one short, both clutching torches. It was Achi and Boss. One stood lookout while the other jammed his torch into the rubble, climbed back into the shaft, and hauled a limp human figure out with immense effort. Hiding behind the slab, Qi Yingning clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp of terror. The person they dragged appeared gravely injured. She could not even tell if they still drew breath. Their legs bent at an unnatural, broken angle, dangling limply in Achi's arms as he dragged them across the debris. The deafening crash earlier must have been this man plummeting down the elevator shaft. Achi dumped the injured man onto a pile of broken concrete and reclaimed his torch from the ground. Boss tilted his head upward, staring into the dark elevator shaft, and spoke. The basement hung dead silent, and even from her hiding spot, Qi Yingning caught every word clearly. Let's head deeper. If those bastards dare chase us down to double-cross us, we'll see just what they're made of. They were coming her way. Qi Yingning shrank further behind her slab, scanning the darkness for another hiding spot. But the basement was pitch black, and she dared not turn the headlamp back on. Every surface teetered on the verge of collapse. Any sudden movement would alert the two men. She curled herself tighter against the concrete slab, praying the thick shadows would conceal her. Fearing discovery, she stowed both the headlamp and watermelon knife into her spatial pocket without a second thought. The pocket could not shield her from danger if she hid inside it, yet retrieving items required nothing more than a thought, perfect for surprise counterattacks. Storing her weapons within the space was far safer than carrying them on her person. The torchlight drew steadily closer. Qi Yingning lay flat behind her cover, holding her breath completely. Two pairs of boots strode past only meters away, moving fast, oblivious to her presence. Thank God. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, yet she remained perfectly still. Once the torch glow vanished around a twisting corridor, she scrambled to her feet and crept silently toward the elevator shaft on hands and knees. She kept the headlamp stowed, unwilling to risk turning it on. Boss and Achi had not gone far, and even a tiny spark of light would draw attention in the pitch-black underground. Only after she'd inched all the way to the shaft and judged the two men far enough to miss its glow did she retrieve the headlamp, strap it on, and flip the switch. She glanced at the man discarded on the rubble pile. He lay motionless, face down atop jagged rebar and concrete chunks. His thigh was clearly shattered, yet no blood stained the debris around him. She could not bear to look any longer. Dropping her gaze, she slipped into the elevator shaft, determined to seize this chance to flee. A shrill whistling sound cut through the air above her. A massive boulder crashed down, narrowly missing her body before slamming into the rubble. Another earth-shattering boom reverberated through the basement. Qiangning scrambled wildly out of the shaft to escape falling debris. Angry shouts echoed from above, followed by an excited yell, "There's a woman down here." The steel elevator cables whined taut as someone began rappelling down toward her. Qiangning turned and ran for her life. A cold premonition coiled in her gut. If she fell into these men's hands, her fate would be far worse than anything Boss and Qi could inflict. She stumbled blindly through the tunnels, the headlamp's beam bouncing wildly ahead of her. Over there. Footsteps thundered behind her, the men tracking her by the light. Glancing back mid-turn, she spotted 4 heavily bundled figures brandishing torches, charging after her like bloodthirsty fiends. Their chase filled the underground warren with raucous noise. Panic sent Qiangning sprinting down a random corridor, only to skid to an abrupt halt. A dead end blocked her path. Unlike Boss and Qi, she knew barely anything of this underground maze, having only traversed it twice before. Her desperate, unplanned flight had left her completely lost within the endless tunnels. She spun around to face the 4 men closing in, their eyes glinting with malicious intent. 1, 2, 3, 4. A full quartet. One wore a full hazmat suit, another held the torch, a third was a squat, dwarfish brute, and the last looked utterly unremarkable in every way. Qiangning counted them silently, slowly retreating, her mind racing to devise a way out. The men seemed in no hurry to capture her, clearly entertained by the cat-and-mouse game. They spread out in a loose circle, advancing slowly to cut off all escape routes. "Boss, once we deal with those 2 earlier, we'll drag this woman back for all of us to have our fun," the squat dwarf on the outer right drawled. His eyes blazed with lechery, as if his gaze alone could strip her bare in an instant. The torch-wielding man on the left of the circle scoffed disdainfully. "Skinny little thing like her, only you'd find that appealing. It's the 3rd year of the apocalypse. Even a sow looks pretty right now, let alone a living woman. We can use her and eat her when we're done." "What a bargain," the plain-faced man on the far left croaked in a harsh, duck-like voice. "Eat her." Qiangning caught the horrid implication of his words instantly. She knew the apocalypse had unraveled all order, knew humanity had turned cruel, knew desperation could drive people to abandon every shred of morality. Had she really stumbled upon such monsters so soon? The men closed in step by step, and Qiangning retreated until a loose concrete slab slid under her heel. She crashed heavily onto the rubble. A roar of mocking laughter erupted through the basement, the gloomy space suddenly thick with their cruel amusement. Qiangning could not bring herself to laugh. She reached back, bracing herself against a huge stone slab, and pushed shakily to her feet. She would not surrender without a fight. Her gaze locked onto the 4 men taunting her, treating her like a toy to torment, as her brain scrambled for a viable counterattack. Back in her old house, she'd owned an axe, kitchen cleaver, the watermelon knife she'd used to kill the rat, and a small folding paring knife. Yet her base physical aptitude remained weak. Even with the enhancement pill, her strength only matched an ordinary civilian, and she had never learned any form of combat. 4 men stood against her. Even if she took 1 or 2 by surprise with her blades, the survivors would easily overpower and kill her. What could she do? Qiangning lifted her head, the headlamp's dim glow illuminating the unstable ceiling overhead. The massive slab beside her jutted upward at an angle, propping open the narrow passage where she stood. She'd guessed earlier the space had once been an underground parking garage, destroyed when the entire building collapsed for some unknown disaster. The ruined, intact support pillars and massive ceiling slabs still formed winding walkways, turning the garage into a sprawling maze dotted with dead ends like this one. The men drew closer, their mocking laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Qiangning staggered upright, staring fixedly at their terrifying silhouettes. The squat dwarf leered up and down her frame. Even through his protective goggles, his predatory lust was palpable. He rubbed his hands together, savoring the sadistic game of toying with trapped prey. Should she risk everything? Or take them all down with her? Qiangning shrank back against the stone slab, trembling with fear as she watched the 4 men advance, torn between 2 terrible choices. If there was any other way out, she would not gamble with her life. But at this moment, every escape route was sealed off. The dwarf stretched a lecherous hand toward her chest, a savage grin splitting his face. At that exact second, a deafening crash echoed from behind the group of men, something massive caving in. The torchbearer and the silent hazmat-suited man spun around, alert. Now was her chance. Qiangning ducked under the dwarf's grabbing hand and rolled hard across the rubble. In one fluid motion, she stowed the giant stone slab she'd been leaning against into her spatial pocket, then scrambled past the broken circle of men to flee. Behind her, a chain of collapses erupted, mixed with screams of agony. Loose gravel and stone showered her back as she ran, coating her in dust, yet she dared not glance behind her. Swift footsteps closed in seconds, and a pair of powerful arms wrapped tight around her waist, yanking her flat onto the concrete. Caught between the headlamp and torchlight, Qiangning made out her captor's face. It was the silent man in the hazmat suit, likely the leader of the four, judging by his stance and commanding aura. While the dwarf and duck-voiced brute had jeered and taunted, he had not uttered a single word this entire time. He'd survived the sudden collapse. Truly, the quiet ones were always the most dangerous. Qiangning thrashed violently, kicking at him with all her strength, yet his grip was ironclad. One massive hand clamped around her throat, cutting off her air supply. Her vision swam black as oxygen drained from her lungs. Fighting through the haze, she fumbled the small paring knife out of her space and drove it hard into the man's chest. A low grunt rumbled from him, yet he did not even flinch. Far more seasoned in combat than her, he refused to release her neck despite the blade buried in his suit. Their struggle devolved into a brutal test of endurance and sheer will, who would break first. Qiangning's shaking hands strained to pull the knife free, yet she had no remaining strength left. She gasped desperately, drawing in nothing but dust. The headlamp's already faint glow faded entirely, leaving only the man's ragged breathing and twisted, furious face filling her sight. Was this how she died? A thunderous roar boomed in her ears, like the toll of a giant bell, or the shrill, ear-splitting screech of brakes from the car crash that had sent her transmigrating to this brutal world. Just then, a shadow streaked past, and with a shrill scream, air rushed back into her lungs. Qiangning gasped violently and sat upright, breaking into racking coughs from her frantic breathing. Once the black veil over her eyes lifted, she could finally see everything clearly again. The man in the protective suit lay crumpled on the ground. His goggles were nowhere to be found, his eyes wide open in death, unblinking. Standing beside him was a tall figure, walking slowly toward Qiangning. He tilted his head to look down at her. "Are you hurt?" Qiangning slumped on the dirt, her face swollen badly, caked in mud and sweat. Dazed, she lifted her gaze to the man who'd saved her life. He looked eerily familiar, clad in the same tattered, heavy cotton-padded jacket she remembered, wearing a homemade mask and those scuffed goggles. It was the boss. She finally recognized him, yet disbelief washed over her. This was the man who'd abducted her from that run-down small apartment and dragged her to this hellish place, and now he'd pulled her from the jaws of death. "Thank you." Qiangning stared blankly for a long moment before whispering. Her throat was raw and injured. Every word sent a sharp stab of pain through her. She twisted her head toward the path she'd tried to flee down. It was completely buried under a landslide of collapsed bricks and stone. The melon guy, the torch guy, the croaky-voiced man, all of them had vanished without a trace beneath the rubble. Only a single unknown hand stretched frantically upward from the debris. Beside that hand stood a Qi, torch raised high in one hand, staring down at the fully collapsed passage. Qiangning stared numbly at the chaos unfolding before her, and only now did terror sink its teeth into her heart. This was the apocalypse, human lives as worthless as weeds. The bruise around her strangled neck throbbed relentlessly, each breath a struggle. If this had been her original world before transmigration, she would have rushed straight to a hospital. But here, all she could do was cradle her neck, trying to soothe herself the only way she knew how. The boss pulled the paring knife that Qiangning had driven into the suited man's chest free. Gripping the bloodied blade, he strode over to her. "We need to talk." Qiangning raised her head to meet his gaze, his face still fully concealed. Her voice came out hoarse and rough. "Talk about what?" The boss flipped the knife around, holding out the hilt toward her. Qiangning took the blade, her mind a whirlwind of panic and confusion. She'd thought that after awakening her spatial storage and swallowing the enhancement pill, She'd at least gain the ability to defend herself in this wasteland. Yet reality had crushed that illusion. She was still far too weak. Even with the body enhancements, she couldn't win a one-on-one fight. The boss lowered his head, watching her through his scratched goggles. Achi and I saw everything that just happened. The stone slab that vanished out of nowhere, and the knife that appeared from thin air. Qiangning's eyes flew wide with shock. His words continued to pound into her ears, quiet yet deafening. You have a spatial storage ability, don't you? She tugged at her lips, desperate for a lie to hide the truth, yet no excuse came to mind. Even if she tried to deceive them, what story could she possibly spin? Claim what they'd seen was just a hallucination? Invent another fake superpower? Or play nice to lull them into complacency, then strike when the chance arose to silence them forever, burying her secret for good? The boss's voice pressed on. That's why the Hope Base locked you up for 3 years. That's why you carried such confidence. You thought you could offer the same supplies the base provides. Qianning hung her head, falling silent for a long time. Her greatest secret had just been uncovered by these two men. They'd once planned to hand her over for supplies, but they'd just saved her life. Are you still planning to trade me to the Hope Base for resources? She asked softly after a pause. The boss shook his head and crouched down in front of her. I originally intended to hand you over, but I've changed my mind. Your worth far outweighs any supplies the Hope Base could give us. Qianning lifted her head, staring blankly into his eyes. Hidden behind the tinted goggles, his irises were murky, dull tawny brown. They bore an uncanny resemblance to the eyes of the mutated monster she'd encountered back in the apartment. For some reason, her mind drifted to the virus rat she'd killed in the basement and the conversation she'd overheard between the boss and Achi before they left. You've been sick for so long. If we don't find treatment soon, it'll be too late. I won't let you turn into one of those monsters. Do you think I don't want to get cured? This is the apocalypse. Where am I supposed to find reliable treatment? So the end of the world had been brought on by a virus? This was a wasteland overrun with mutated humans? But if a virus alone was the cause, how did the collapsed, shattered buildings fit into the picture? What are your terms? Qianning stopped evading the question, locking eyes with him to voice the thought weighing on her mind. This world was brutally dangerous, and before she grasped its unforgiving rules, she needed allies. Teaming up with the boss might not align perfectly with her own interests, yet as far as she could tell, he and Achi were the most decent survivors she'd met so far. You have nothing to fear. We'll keep your secret. We won't ask for or take any supplies from your space, but I have one condition. The boss held her gaze unwaveringly, cutting straight to the point. Achi and I are leaving Ningqing to head for the city safe zone. We want you to come with us. The road ahead is deadly, and we can't guarantee your safety 100%. But he paused, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. You ran away from the Hope Base anyway. Leaving Ningqing is a far better choice for you too, isn't it? Qianning hesitated, then made a bold decision. She lowered her voice. I have one condition of my own. What is it? The boss frowned. Qianning stared firmly at him. I've lost all my memories. I need you to explain everything about this world to me. The boss drew in a sharp breath. Amnesia. Qianning nodded. I woke up in that apartment with no recollection of anything before that. All I remember is having spatial storage, escaping from someplace, and what the world was like before the apocalypse. Perhaps the wasteland sharpened human instincts. Every choice she'd made since waking had been driven purely by raw survival reflex. She needed a believable cover story to explain everything. If this temporary alliance held, she hoped to learn more about this reality and grow strong enough to protect herself. But if she truly partnered with the boss and Achi, her complete ignorance of post-apocalyptic life was impossible to hide. She might fabricate lies for small details, but her constant confusion and unfamiliarity with this broken world would give her away eventually. The boss nodded in understanding and held out a hand to her. I'll tell you every single thing that's happened since the end of the world. Will you come with us now? Qianning lifted her hand and clasped his. His palm was dry, rough, covered in thick calluses forged by years of scraping by in the wasteland. Happy to cooperate, she said. Even though she barely knew anything about the boss and Achi, Qianning chose to ally with them. Right now, she simply lacked the power to make other choices. Above all else, she needed to stay alive, to live on. Even being watched, confined, stripped of freedom was infinitely better than death. Only the living could grow stronger, could carve out the life they wanted. The boss smiled, pushing his goggles up onto his forehead and uttering 2 short words. Jiang Ran. He then nodded toward Achi, who stood a short distance away holding the torch and staying quiet. That's Jiangqi. Achi pulled off his goggles and tugged down his mask, revealing a youthful, boyish face. Just call me Achi. Qi Yingning. She nodded to both men, curious. Are you two brothers? The boss shook his head. No. I found Achi wandering the streets 3 years ago, so he took my surname. He didn't elaborate further on Achi's past, and Qi Yingning didn't press him. She stood, quickly assessing her physical state and planning their next move. Her strangled neck still throbbed faintly, though the pain had faded significantly. Her mind remained clear. There was no ringing in her head, no nausea or urge to vomit, meaning the blow she'd taken to her skull hadn't caused a concussion. It was a small mercy amid all the disaster. Achi led the way forward with his torch, and, true to his word, Jiang Ran walked beside Qi Yingning, recounting the events that had destroyed civilization. His opening statement hit her like a bombshell. 3 years ago, a 10-kilometer-wide asteroid was pulled into Blue Planet's gravitational pull. The inhabitants of this world called their home Blue Planet? A 10-kilometer asteroid captured by gravity? Qi Yingning instantly thought of the extinction of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs had been wiped out by an asteroid of exactly that size slamming into Earth. No, that couldn't be right. She thought back to the apartment building she'd woken up in after transmigrating. If a rock of that mass had crashed directly into the planet, no apartment complex could have survived the cataclysmic impact energy. Even this underground tunnel system would have been reduced to rubble in the ensuing earthquakes. Jiang Ran continued his story. Asteroid defense agencies issued warnings the moment they detected it. But every nation was locked in warfare and ignored the alerts until the asteroid breached the atmosphere. War. Qi Yingning echoed the word instinctively. If all the major nations of the world were fighting, that meant a full-scale global war. She quickly realized this had all unfolded before the apocalypse, so she bit back her flood of questions and listened intently. Luckily, Jiang Ran didn't notice her brief interruption and kept speaking. World governments finally realized the asteroid threat wasn't a hoax. The 5-year global war ground to an immediate halt. Nuclear warheads were gathered en masse. Humanity clung to hope that their most devastating weapons would blow the planet-killing asteroid apart. Jiang Ran paused mid-step. Qi Yingning looked up in confusion to find they'd returned to the entrance of the underground shelter. Achi dismantled the hidden latch and pushed open the fireproof door, ushering them all inside. The space looked unchanged, yet the infected virus rat she'd killed was gone without a trace. Jiang Ran cut his explanation short and stepped over to a metal cabinet bolted to the wall. Its contents had already been packed away into 2 large backpacks sitting fully loaded inside. Beneath the bags, 2 tightly bound bundles of firewood were stacked on the cabinet's bottom shelf. They'd prepared for departure well in advance. Jiang Ran tossed a bottle of water to Qi Yingning, slinging one backpack over his shoulders while Achi took the other. He glanced back at her. Fuel is scarce in the wasteland. Can you store these bundles of firewood in your space? He hesitated, then added awkwardly, if you've got room, we'd ideally take these metal cabinets too. Qi Yingning nodded and stepped forward, storing every item away into her spatial dimension one by one. Let's move. This place isn't safe anymore. Jiang Ran lit a fresh torch, gripped it in one hand, and stepped out of the tiny shelter first. Qi Yingning hurried after him. Though she ached to hear the rest of the story of how the world had ended, she knew there was no time to linger. Jiang Ran seemed to be avoiding a certain route. Instead of heading toward the elevator shaft, he led them down a far rougher, steeper passage. They were forced to climb towering mounds of collapsed debris, then crouch to squeeze through narrow openings barely wide enough for a single person. Dirt and grime coated Qi Yingning as she scrambled over rubble until they finally reached a shattered staircase landing. The original entrance is probably patrolled by Hope Base soldiers. We'll exit through here. Jiang Ran held up his torch to carefully illuminate the stairs above. Seeing no sign of movement outside, he relaxed slightly. He handed the torch to Achi, leaped upward, and caught a steel rebar protruding from the broken stairwell. With one fluid pull-up, he hauled himself onto the higher landing. Once steady on the stairs, he called down. Climb up. Achi stepped forward and tossed the torch upward, which Jiang Ran caught mid-air. Their coordination was smooth and practiced, as if they'd repeated this maneuver hundreds of times before. Then a gunshot rang out. The sharp crack echoed endlessly through the silent underground tunnels. Jiang Ran stood at the stairwell bend, torch in hand, twisting to face the source of the shot. His body crumpled and fell backward. Boss, A Chi's scream tore through the air. He sprinted forward, catching Jiang Ran's falling body in his arms. Jiang Ran's chest soaked rapidly with blood. He strained to speak, his voice faint and fragile. "Run, A Chi. Run." Several men dressed in black emerged from the upper stairs. They carried no torches, their forms blending almost seamlessly into the shadows. A Chi slung Jiang Ran onto his back and turned to flee at once. Qi Yingning followed without hesitation. Behind them, the ground rumbled faintly as more figures jumped down the stairs in pursuit. Click-clack. The distinct sound of a rifle being chambered echoed from their rear. "Watch out." Every hair on Qi Yingning's body stood on end. She lunged forward and tackled A Chi, who still carried the wounded boss on his back. The three of them tumbled into a tangled heap, yet no shot followed. "Ha ha." A cruel male laugh boomed behind them. Qi Yingning spun around in a rage to see the group of men strolling slowly toward them. It was too late to scramble back to their feet and run. Qi Yingning glanced at A Chi beside her. He'd already drawn his blade. His mask covered half his face, hiding his expression, but his eyes burned with unyielding resolve to fight to the death alongside the boss. "Go," Jiang Ran whispered weakly from the dirt. "Well, look what we've got, a girl." The lead man whistled mockingly, clearly underestimating the three of them. A loaded rifle rested in his grasp. He slowly raised the firearm, aiming the barrel straight at A Chi's head. Qi Yingning shot to her feet, throwing her arms forward in a reckless rage. "I'll fight you all." None of the men paid any mind to her unarmed outburst. But the next instant, a deafening crash shook the entire underground complex. An enormous reinforced concrete slab materialized out of thin air, slamming hard into the heads of the advancing men. Their mocking laughter cut off instantly, replaced by agonized screams. The men were still alive, but gravely injured. A Chi burst forward like a black panther, lightning fast. The gleaming blade in his hand caught the dim torchlight as he moved, cutting down their attackers one after another. The screams faded one by one until he jumped lightly on top of the massive stone slab. The men trapped beneath it had fallen silent. Qi Yingning gasped for breath, staring at the carnage spread before her. The slab she'd summoned was the same reinforced concrete block she'd stored in her space earlier, back when she'd tried to trigger a collapse to escape her pursuers. She'd never gotten a chance to use it until now, yet it had turned the tide in their favor. A Chi leaped off the slab and rushed to Jiang Ran's side. The boss's condition was critical. His mask had fallen off somewhere, leaving his full face exposed. One glance sent a shudder through Qi Yingning. Distinct leonine features marred his face, nearly identical to the mutated monster she'd faced in the apartment. Only his mutation hadn't progressed as far. Nosing pus covered his skin, and his nasal bridge hadn't caved in. Qi Yingning could even trace faint traces of the handsome man he'd once been beneath the distortion. His gaze grew unfocused, blankly scanning the space before settling on Qi Yingning standing nearby. "Is that you, A Chi?" "Boss." A Chi choked out the name, clutching his hand, too overcome with sobs to speak. "Don't grieve." Jiang Ran forced a weak smile, pulling at his cracked lips. "We both knew this day would come. You should be glad I'm finally free. I don't want you to leave." A Chi shouted brokenly. "Ever since you pulled me off those streets, how many of our companions have we lost? Uncle Ing, brother Bai, Uncle Huang, sisterly. We started as 10 people, grew to more than 20, and now it's just you and me left. You promised you'd always protect me, boss." A barely audible sigh escaped Jiang Ran. "I'm sorry. I can't keep that promise anymore." His tawny, unfocused eyes drifted aimlessly before locking back onto Qi Yingning. "I'm sorry to leave A Chi in your care. Please take him to U City. It's the last true haven left in this broken world. He's a loyal, trustworthy partner, and he'll guard your secret. You can ask him anything you need to know." Qi Yingning knelt down, placing one hand over their intertwined palms. "I promise you," she said firmly. "I'll travel to U City with A Chi." "Thank you." The boss heaved a deep sigh of relief, then broke into a faint smile. "It's wonderful. I never imagined I'd get to die as a human being." A smile lingered on his lips as his eyes slid shut. "Boss." Aki let out a wail, throwing himself over the man's body, sobbing uncontrollably. Qi Yingning stood frozen nearby, staring blankly at the boss's misshapen, distorted face. Though she'd already harbored suspicions about his true condition, the sight of his real form still sent a jolt of terror through her. When she'd first encountered monsters in the apartment, she'd assumed the world was plagued by a zombie virus. Later, after overhearing the boss and Aki arguing in the underground shelter and crossing paths with virus-carrying rats, she'd grown fully convinced of that theory. But the boss's existence laid bare the truth that everything she'd thought was wrong. After all, he'd stood before her fully alive, able to run, jump, speak coherently, think clearly, and feel genuine human emotion. She could not bring herself to equate him with the fictional zombies from books, nor the grotesque creatures she'd fought before. He was still a person. Aki did not weep for long. Years of surviving the apocalypse had forged an innate, razor-sharp vigilance within him. Even in grief, he kept his emotions tightly reined. After a short spell of sniffling, he regained his composure. "I'm going to bury the boss. Do you want to come with me?" "I'll help," Qiangning nodded. Aki moved with methodical precision. First, he unslung the backpacks from both his own shoulders and the boss's. Next, he grabbed the sputtering, dying torch off the ground and walked toward a slab of stone. After a brief search, he retrieved the handgun that had killed the boss. There was a soft click as Aki ejected the magazine. He glanced at it once, then slid it back into place. "It's empty. You keep this." He handed the pistol to Qiangning with a bitter, hollow laugh, his voice heavy with sorrow. Only one bullet, and the boss couldn't escape it. Qiangning sighed and glanced at the packs laid on the ground. "Shall I stow these away?" Aki nodded, then lifted the boss onto his back. Qiangning quickly gathered the gun and backpacks into her spatial storage and hurried after him. Aki led the way with the boss slung over his shoulders, the pair stumbling through a corridor half collapsed with rubble. "This is the spot." "Fetch a metal cabinet for me," Aki whispered. Qiangning summoned an iron cabinet from her spatial space. Aki gently lowered the boss's body inside, then latched the door shut securely. Qiangning watched silently as Aki murmured a quiet farewell. She remembered thinking these horizontal metal lockers looked just like coffins the first time she'd laid eyes on them. Now she knew they really would serve that grim purpose. Aki pushed the cabinet into a hollow nook at the corridor's end, framed by two large stone slabs propped against one another. He then turned to face Qiangning. "Can you store these stones away?" He gestured at the two supporting slabs. If they were removed, the mounds of soil and construction debris overhead would crash down, burying the boss entirely. This was Aki's way of laying him to rest. Qiangning said nothing. She stepped forward and rested her palms against the stone slabs. "Store," she thought to herself. The triangular stone structure vanished, and a torrent of dirt and broken concrete slabs crashed violently down. "Watch out." Aki lunged forward in an instant, yanking Qiangning back into the still intact half of the corridor. Loose boulders rolled inward behind them, and unstable sections of the passageway crumbled away one after another. The collapse was far more powerful than either had anticipated. Like a butterfly beating its wings, distant thunderous crashes echoed from deeper underground. The entire subterranean complex shrugged, as if bidding farewell to Jiang Ran. But Qiangning had no time to glance back at the massive makeshift funeral. Aki dragged her into a desperate sprint. Even when loose stones sent her stumbling and nearly falling, his grip on her hand never loosened. A massive boulder plummeted directly in their path. Aki reacted instantly, skidding to a halt and pulling Qiangning aside just in time to avoid being crushed. He scanned their surroundings, then tugged her over to a relatively intact wall. They slid down to sit against it. One hand held the torch high above their heads, while the other wrapped tightly around Qiangning to shield her. After a long while, the rumble of collapsing stone faded. Qiangning lifted her dust-caked head, the dim torchlight revealing the wreckage around them. The tunnel where they'd buried Jiang Ran was gone without a trace, sealed off completely by solid concrete rubble. The other side fared marginally better. Although the corridor had not fully collapsed, the remaining narrow passage hung precariously, ready to cave in at any moment. "Damn it," Aki muttered under his breath, clearly unprepared for this turn of events as he stood to his feet. Qiangning rose beside him, staring at the drastically altered underground landscape, and whispered, "Can we still get out?" "We can." Aki nodded and pulled a compass from inside his jacket. He walked as he spoke quietly. "This used to be an underground parking garage. It never fully collapsed after the apocalypse, and there are pockets we can shelter in. We found this place a while back and made it our base. It's caved in more than once before. As long as we follow the compass, we'll find a way out." They stumbled over debris, climbing up and down piles of broken masonry, navigating by the compass. At several points, Qiangning had to pull massive boulders into her spatial storage to clear their path. Eventually, they reached the elevator shaft they'd descended through earlier. The collapse had spread this far too. The corpses littered at the shaft's entrance were buried beneath mounds of broken stone. Thankfully, a tiny opening still remained. Aki squeezed through first, with Qi Yingning close on his heels. The elevator shaft itself remained relatively intact. The steel cables they'd used to climb down still dangled overhead, untouched by the destruction. "I'll head up first to scout. If there's an ambush, don't follow," Aki said. He clamped the torch between his teeth, grabbed the cables, and hauled himself upward. Qi Yingning stood at the bottom of the shaft, watching him climb higher and vanish through the elevator exit, her heart tangled with a swirl of conflicting emotions. It felt like only moments ago, yet Jiang Ran was already gone. And this young boy beside her was now her true traveling companion. Whether their partnership was temporary or not, he had given her nothing but unwavering loyalty. He'd pulled her along and shielded her every step of the way just now. And now, unsure of what dangers waited above, he'd volunteered to scout alone. Did the boy truly not grasp how cruel and unforgiving this end-of-the-world wasteland was? Aki poked his head out from above and waved the torch at her. "No hostiles up here. Can you climb, or should I pull you up?" Qi Yingning shook her head, reached for the hanging steel cable, and copied his earlier movements, hauling herself upward inch by inch. She'd taken a strengthening pill. While it hadn't granted her superhuman abilities to fly or burrow through Earth, it had boosted her physical strength significantly. More importantly, in this brutal apocalypse, she refused to become a burden to anyone traveling with her. She struggled all the way to the shaft's upper exit, where Aki waited with his outstretched hand. She placed her palm in his, and he hauled her out onto ground level once more. The torch's flame sputtered and dimmed, then flickered out entirely. Faint gray light seeped in through the wrecked lobby's broken exterior walls. Aki did not light a new torch. He laced his fingers through Qi Yingning's and led her cautiously outside. "It's daytime now, far more dangerous out here." "Daytime?" Qi Yingning raised an eyebrow, staring at the gloomy sky beyond the lobby, scarcely brighter than twilight. Could this really count as day? "This is what daylight looks like after the Great Cataclysm," Aki replied, leading her out of the half-collapsed office tower and gesturing at the murky, ash-choked heavens. When the asteroid struck, tons of dust blanketed the entire planet, blocking nearly all sunlight. He remembered the deal the boss had struck with Qi Yingning and elaborated thoroughly. It was far worse the first few years. The sky stayed pitch black nonstop, no way to tell day from night. Countless survivors broke down and took their own lives, while others lashed out with mindless violence and slaughtered anyone they crossed paths with. Qi Yingning gazed upward. As far as the eye could see, thick, oppressive gray smog hung heavy overhead, weighing on her chest just to look at. She could barely imagine how unbearable it had been in the early days, when the whole world lay shrouded in absolute, unbroken darkness. She hurried to keep pace behind Aki, lowering her voice to ask, "Where are we headed next?" "That way." Aki paused and pointed toward a stretch of desolate ruins. "The boss found a sewer entrance a while back, well hidden from sight. We'll hole up there for the night to rest, then plan our next moves afterward." He quickened his stride and led her toward a shattered, unrecognizable road. As Qi Yingning scanned the rubble, searching for the sewer's opening, Aki pointed at a massive concrete traffic boulder. "It's underneath this." The huge gray stone block stood nearly waist-high on an adult, close to a meter wide and long. Faded yellow and black hazard paint was still faintly visible on its surface. It was far too heavy for one person to shift alone. Qi Yingning stepped forward and stored the boulder in her spatial space, revealing a pitch-black tunnel mouth beneath it. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. Aki tossed his backpack down into the sewer, lit a fresh torch and ducked inside with Qi Yingning following close behind. Qi Yingning no longer needed prompting. After slipping into the tunnel, she retrieved the heavy concrete boulder from her storage and set it back over the entrance, completely sealing their hiding spot from outside view. Then she braced her hands against the sewer shaft's rough stone walls and lowered herself downward, copying Aki's lead. The bottom of the shaft was engulfed in shadow, as if leading straight down into the underworld. They descended steadily until Qi Yingning's feet touched solid ground. The vertical shaft was not especially deep. Now lit by the torch, two horizontal sewer tunnels stretched left and right. The left passage had fully collapsed, leaving only crumpled, crushed concrete pipes. The right tunnel was also buried further in, but a small clear pocket remained near the shaft, enough space for them to rest. Aki and the boss had clearly sheltered here before. A pile of dry firewood and dead grass was stacked at the far end of the side tunnel. Aki jammed the torch upright in the dirt and sat down. Qingning pulled both backpacks out of her spatial storage and set them on the ground. Aki unzipped one, pulling out several plastic bottles of water and a cloth sack. The water was stored in beat-up old mineral water bottles, murky and yellowed. The plastic surfaces, once transparent, were worn matte and scratched raw, all brand labels long scrubbed away. He handed one bottle to Qingning, then opened the cloth sack and scooped a handful of its contents into her palm. "Eat something. Once we've rested, I'll tell you about the boss's plan." Qingning cupped the dried goods in both hands, leaning close to the torchlight to make out what she'd been given, handfuls of dehydrated wild mushrooms. Aki had already pulled down his face mask and goggles, revealing his young, youthful features. Starving, he shoveled mushroom and sipped water in quick, ravenous bites. Seeing Qingning hesitate, he chugged a mouthful of water to wash down his food and asked curiously, "Haven't you ever eaten mushrooms before?" "I have, just never dried one straight like this." Qingning removed her own mask and goggles, popping a mushroom into her mouth to chew. Dehydrated completely, the fungi were tough and leathery between her teeth, like chewing a strip of rubber. Thankfully, as saliva soaked into the dried flesh, they softened into a smooth, slippery texture. She twisted open the water bottle he'd given her and took a sip. A sharp, unpleasant taste flooded her mouth instantly. The water was salty and bitter, thick with earthy, astringent muck. No one would choose to drink it unless driven to extreme thirst. Qingning grimaced and swallowed the water along with the mushroom. Remembering the boss had never finished explaining the events of the apocalypse, she spoke up. "Can you tell me everything that happened after the cataclysm while we rest here?" Aki nodded in understanding. "The asteroid strike the boss mentioned, we call it the Great Cataclysm." He paused to gather his thoughts and continued recounting what he'd shared earlier. "I told you all the world's nuclear warheads were gathered up to blow the asteroid apart. Did it work?" Qingning blurted out the question before she could stop herself. "The asteroid did break into fragments," Aki said, first nodding then shaking his head. "But even the shards were enormous. The largest piece, roughly 4 kilometers across, slammed into the Antarctic ice shelf." "The Antarctic ice shelf?" Qingning gasped in shock. "Exactly. It split and melted massive swathes of glacial ice." Aki mumbled around a mouthful of dried mushroom. "The other fragments weren't small either, 1 to 2 kilometers wide each, crashing into the other continents. We were lucky in Ningqing, no direct impact hit us. But we still suffered the aftershocks." He took another sip of water and gestured upward. "This city's ruined state is all from global earthquakes triggered by the collision. I heard coastal cities like Huqing and Rongqing were swallowed whole by tsunamis, not a single survivor left. Ningqing fared better. The floodwaters surged up the Lujiang River, but only submerged the low-lying districts." Qingning pulled a map out of her spatial storage and unfolded it. It was a national map, but the country's outline did not match the rooster shape she knew, and the coastline curved nothing like the familiar bow she remembered. Aki's soft voice drifted over beside her. "Tsunamis and earthquakes erased civilization entirely, and the endless dust cloud blotted out the sun. That's why we still have to wear goggles and masks everywhere we go." Qingning listened quietly, sorting through everything he'd said and cross-referencing it with what Jiang Ran had told her earlier. From their past conversations, they were currently in Ningqing. The city was controlled by a faction calling themselves Hope Base. Despite their hopeful name, the group brought no salvation to local survivors, committing countless cruel atrocities instead. That was why Jiang Ran and Aki hoped to stockpile enough supplies to travel to a settlement called Yuqing. The disasters unleashed by the asteroid strike stretched far beyond the brief details Jiang Ran had touched on before. The day the asteroid hit, shockwaves triggered non-stop earthquakes across every continent, flattening countless buildings. Ningqing skyscrapers were nearly all destroyed in those tremors. Thousands were trapped and crushed beneath rubble, and the living survivors were too busy scrambling for their own lives to help anyone else. The Lujiang, the world's second-longest river, cut straight through the city. Tsunamis driven by the asteroid's impact surged inland along its waterways. The floodwaters contaminated all of Ningqing's underground aquifers, turning the fresh water bitter and salty as it was now. Survivors banded together into factions scattered across the rubble, fighting tooth and nail over the last remaining supplies. They quickly learned that groups with more strong young men held the advantage, far more likely to live another day. Elderly folk and children were cast aside as disposable burdens. Qiangning lifted her gaze to Aki, his young face illuminated by the torch's wavering flame. "How old are you?" she asked gently. Aki counted silently on his fingers, then whispered his answer. 13. I turned 13 this year. The boss found me 3 years ago. So you were only 10 when the Great Cataclysm hit? Qiangning could scarcely believe it. How had a 10-year-old child survive such a catastrophic celestial disaster alone? What about your parents? She asked. She recalled Aki mentioning earlier that Jiang Ran had picked him up wandering the streets in the basement shelter. My parents. Aki let out a cold, bitter laugh and said nothing more. He stared into the dark shadows lining the sewer pipes, as if lost in memory, or emphasizing a hard truth. I only have one family in this world, the boss. He saved my life. He fought the whole group to let me stay with them. He taught me every trick to survive in this wasteland, dragged me through 3 years of scraping by to stay alive. Whatever food he had, he split with me. He is my father, my mother, and my elder brother all rolled into one. I bear his surname. My name is Jiang Qi. She paused for a beat, his blazing gaze locking onto Qiangning. Boss said I'm to stick by you, and I'm yours for the rest of my life. Qiangning stared into his bright eyes, momentarily lost for words. If every word she spoke was true, then the late Jiang Ran was nothing short of a saint. Few people, after such an apocalyptic catastrophe, would take in a child incapable of full independent judgment and raise him with care. Seeing Qiangning's interest, Qi lowered his voice and went on. Boss said kids don't eat much and grow fast, so raising me wasn't hard at all. Qiangning listened intently to his account. Before the end of the world, Jiang Ran had been a small farmer who grew mushrooms. When the apocalypse struck, he gathered a band of ordinary survivors bound together by mutual reliance and shared warmth. At its peak, their group numbered around 20, construction workers, mechanics, insurance salesmen, folk from every walk of life. Traveling in packs to scavenge supplies, they never fell victim to roving raiders. Coupled with Jiang Ran's mushroom cultivation skills, they scraped by in the wasteland. After the Great Cataclysm, the sun vanished entirely, and mushrooms were the only crop that could thrive in perpetual darkness. Tragically, the disasters triggered by the asteroid impact stretched far beyond tsunamis and an endless night. Acid rain poured from the skies, poisoning surface water and rendering groundwater barely drinkable. The few deep wells with safe potable water fell under the control of major factions, accessible only through bartering supplies. Temperatures plummeted day by day. Humans scraped by amid rubble, fighting viciously over the dwindling scraps left behind. It was during this dark era that Hope Base rose to power. Its leader claimed to be the earthly emissary of the God of Hope, preaching that anyone who joined the base and worshipped the deity would receive divine guidance and protection through the apocalypse and witness the dawn of a new world. Drowning in utter despair, many clung to the faint glimmer he offered. Foolishly enough, countless survivors swallowed his lies and became members of Hope Base. But what truly allowed Hope Base to expand and seize total dominion over Ningqing was the marrow-corroding virus. The pathogen emerged silently 1 year after the cataclysm. Early infected individuals gained enhanced physical prowess, their only other symptom being skin lesions, silvery scaly plaques breaking out across their faces and bodies, with no other adverse effects. Hope Base seized the chance to propagandize the virus as a blessing from the God of Hope. The early apocalypse was a realm of unbridled chaos. Law enforcers were gone, all order collapsed. Humanity lost the means of production, forced to survive solely by scavenging pre-cataclysm goods from ruins. Those with greater strength and superior abilities naturally hoarded more supplies, a vicious, inescapable cycle. And Hope Base's leader stood as the most powerful of all infected survivors. Enraptured by his rhetoric, hordes of Ningqing's survivors flocked to Hope Base, desperate to draw near their leader and pray for their own evolution. Even those skeptical of the so-called divine blessing could barely resist the allure of growing stronger. Worse still, the marrow-corroding virus was highly contagious, and proper disinfection and disease prevention were next to impossible to achieve in the wasteland. That was how the first case surfaced within Jiang Ran's group. She whispered, Brother Bai was the first to show symptoms. He was overjoyed at the prospect of growing stronger. Then Brother Che, Uncle Dong. Boss sensed something terrible and tried to contain it, but it was already out of control. We had no choice. To survive, we had to stay grouped together. Wandering alone in the apocalypse was a death sentence. Besides, who wouldn't want to grow more powerful? But later, every sick person twisted beyond recognition. They grew increasingly feral, unable to rein in their rage. They were turning into monsters. He rubbed his eyes and continued. Hope Base spread rumors that the infected turned monstrous only because they lacked faith in the God of Hope. They held up their leader as proof, untouched by the corruption, blessed with unmatched power. Our group split apart for the first time. Brother Bai, the earliest infected and most heavily mutated, demanded we march to Hope Base and convinced several others to follow him. Chi set aside his food and water, drew his knees to his chest, and buried his face in his arms, his voice muffled. Later, Uncle Ing fixed an old radio. We caught broadcasts from U-City Safe Zone explaining the sickness, the marrow-corroding virus, an infectious disease that always killed its victims in the end. I caught the virus not long after. But I was luckier than the rest. I developed antibodies and never turned into a monster. That's when we realized why Hope Base's leader remained unharmed. He must be another evolved survivor who built immunity mid-infection, yet he hid the truth and passed it off as a divine gift from the God of Hope. I ran into Uncle Bai in the ruins once. He still wore the woven bracelet I'd made for him, but he didn't recognize me at all. Chi fell silent, shoulders shaking silently as he buried his head deeper in his arms. Qingning sat numb, staring down at the map spread before her. The torch flame flickered gently, casting wavering shadows across its surface. She hadn't forgotten the rat attack in the basement. Virus-infected rodents had lunged at her, their bodily fluids splashing across her face. If the marrow-corroding virus spread through bodily fluids, would she fall ill too? Slowly mutate like Brother Bai, and eventually become the feral creature she'd encountered in the apartment block? A violent shudder ran through her at the thought, and she shook her head hard. What would be, would be. If the virus took hold, she'd slip away quietly rather than suffer through this brutal existence. No one could say which fate was crueler in this broken world. Yet the primal urge to survive still gnawed at her, pushing her to cling to life for as long as possible. Compared to scraping out a living amid the apocalypse, neither outcome seemed appealing. Pushing the grim thoughts aside, she traced the carbon line Boss had drawn across the map, stretching from Ningqing all the way to U-City. The two cities sat over 300 kilometers apart, a mere 3-hour drive before the cataclysm. Now, with roadways crumbled and all vehicles long gone, travel meant nothing but endless walking. Even Ningqing, once stocked with mountains of pre-apocalypse supplies, now suffered crippling shortages. The journey to U-City on foot promised unending hardship. For one thing, mutated wildlife left behind by the disasters alone would pose a deadly threat. Then there was the constant struggle for food and clean water. How would they fend off roving bandit groups along the way? The asteroid's cataclysmic disasters would not end so simply. What new calamities might they face mid-journey? One daunting problem stacked atop another. Qingning lifted her gaze to Qi. What did Boss plan to do to reach U-City, back when he was alive? Qi lifted his tear-streaked face, gasping for breath. Boss wanted to stockpile enough supplies first, then take me and flee the city together. He saved all this food. He nodded toward an unzipped backpack at his feet, the source of their earlier rations and water. These tools, too, for clearing paths and self-defense on the road. He unslung a second pack and pulled out a handful of hardware tools, alongside the old radio. This radio's the one Uncle Ing repaired all those years ago. He flipped it on, static crackling from the speaker. Miraculously, the device still held power. Qingning stared at it in surprise. Everything she'd laid eyes on since transmigrating was primitive beyond belief. Torches for light, unfiltered cold water to drink, dried mushrooms chewed raw for sustenance. Shivering was their only source of warmth. Where does the radio get its electricity? Qingning asked. Qi rummaged in the backpack and held out a small contraption. This hand crank generator powers it. He attached the power cord and turned the crank handle to demonstrate. 2 hours of cranking gives 10 minutes of radio use. He turned the crank again with a sigh of regret. When Uncle Ing was still with us, he built a cage rig. We'd trap rats inside, and their constant running spun the wheel. He wired the generator to it, so it charged the batteries automatically with no one tending it. But our group shrank little by little until Uncle Ing was gone. We couldn't hold on to our old shelter anymore, so we were forced to move. Qi's eyes reddened once more. He turned back to Qi Yingning, roughly wiping his face and smearing grime into messy streaks across his cheeks, making him look like a smudged stray cat. Boss knew the trip to U City would be brutal. We talked it over dozens of times. But Ningxing's supplies are drying up fast. The only other choice is to swear fealty to Hope Base and become their lackeys. He took that bounty job as a last resort, grabbed the reward supplies and escaped for good. He knew bandits would ambush us for the payout, and braced for Hope Base's men to attack and steal everything. But we never expected Hope Base's enforcers to carry guns. Qi's head drooped at the memory of Jiang Ran's death. Qi Yingning studied the worn map closely. Folded countless times, its edges frayed and creases torn. Carbon circles marked mountain ranges, potential water sources, and urban stretches they would have to cross. Jiang Ran had not lied to her. He had truly planned to flee Ningxing for the distant safety of U City's safe zone. She reached out and patted Qi gently on the shoulder. I gave boss my word I'd take you to U City's safe zone, and I won't break that promise. She meant it sincerely. As a transmigrator, she had no roots in this world. Any destination was as good as the next. If Ningxing offered a modicum of stability, she would not mind staying. But with the city firmly under the thumb of Hope Base's Baal cult, fleeing sooner rather than later was the wisest choice. She twisted the radio dial for several minutes, picking up nothing but static. He switched it off, gathered all scattered supplies, dragged straw from the corner to spread a bed against the wall, and lay down. He'd even laid out a straw mat for Qi Yingning. The torch remained stuck in the mud floor at the sewer's center, its flame dancing softly. Qi Yingning folded the map away, glanced at her half-eating dried mushrooms and untouched water, and carefully stowed them. Before settling onto her straw mat, mirroring Qi's posture. Hungry as she was, the pack of biscuits she'd eaten earlier left her too full to stomach the tough raw mushrooms. With nothing better to do, she resolved to retreat into her spatial pocket and take stock of its contents. Qi Yingning closed her eyes and focused her mind. Familiar white light swirled around her, and she found herself standing once more in the living room of her old family home. This living room served as the fixed entry point to her spatial pocket. No matter where she exited the space, she would always return here upon re-entry. She glanced around the pocket, bright, spotless, and warm as ever. Yet subtle changes had taken place. All items she'd brought into the space automatically returned to their original storage spots, while newly scavenged supplies were stacked neatly near the staircase. Through the living room window, she spotted several steel storage cabinets and 2 large stone slabs she'd stowed earlier, lined up tidily in the front yard. Did the space feature an automatic sorting function? Astonished, she hurried out to the yard and ran a hand across the rough stone surface, solid and tangible beneath her palm. Standing in the yard center, she surveyed her surroundings. The spacious concrete paved front yard looked exactly as she remembered it. Built 2 years ago during the house's renovation as a parking area. Bamboo grew in planters lining the outer wall. Glancing back at the jarring steel cabinets and stone slabs, she stepped indoors to continue her inventory. She'd entered the spatial pocket to catalog every supply she possessed and gauge the full extent of its utility. Time was too precious for wallowing in grief. She'd swallowed the slip of paper bearing instructions long ago, forcing her to rely on fragmented memories of its words, praying she recalled every detail correctly. This world is deadly. Proceed with extreme caution, she recited silently to herself. I have secured a spatial pocket for you, containing all your pre-transmigration belongings. Running water and electricity are available inside. And the strength enhancement pill, of course. She'd consumed it already, yet it had yielded no dramatic boosts so far, leaving her silently griping. Other transmigrators received pills granting immortal cultivation or superhuman strength. Hers was nothing more than a cheap muscle tonic. Still, the spatial pocket itself was an invaluable boon. While it could not shield her from danger, retrieving and storing items was effortless. And it made for devastating surprise ambushes. Cheered by the silver lining, she began inspecting the house room by room. First, she plugged in her dying headlamp. The charging indicator flickered to life, easing her worries over illumination. With the pocket's power supply at her disposal, she no longer needed Qi's hand crank generator. 2 hours of labor for 10 minutes of radio use was now obsolete. Food came first, as the old saying went. She hurried to the kitchen and twisted the faucet. Clear tap water gushed forth without a hitch. Perfect, water and power both functional, just as the note promised. Her tests left her utterly stunned. The spatial pocket replicated every utility connected to her old house pre-transmigration: running water, electricity, even fully operational gas lines. All municipal services her home had enjoyed existed within this pocket dimension. There was one catch, however: interacting with the space came with odd limitations. Her form inside the pocket functioned like a disembodied consciousness. She could complete any task within its bounds: cook, boil water, mend clothes, build furniture, with no hindrance. But any action altering her physical body failed entirely. She could shower inside the pocket, yet her real body outside would remain coated in grime. Eating or drinking within the space was impossible. Any food or liquid she tried to consume would slip straight through her mouth and clatter to the floor, as if her jaw led to an endless void rather than an esophagus and stomach. All water and food had to be carried out of the pocket in containers for her real body to consume. Thankfully, the perks outweighed the flaws. She could charge electronics, cook hot meals, and carry prepared warm food back into the wasteland. The only drawback was explaining where steaming hot meals came from to outsiders. She would cross that bridge when she came to it. Qiangning sorted through the kitchen stockpiles. Her mother's obsession with hoarding groceries left an unexpectedly massive reserve of food. The rice crock held nearly 40 jin of uncooked grain, filled 3/4 full. Opening the upper cabinet, she found sealed packs of dried shiitake, wood ear, tremella, bamboo shoots, nori, dried tofu sticks, and oil tofu skin. A jar of dried shrimp sat beside a bundle of kelp. 2 large milk powder tins and 1 protein powder can stood next in line. She pried open the lids. 1 milk powder tin was half empty, the other unopened. The protein powder remained barely touched. Beside them sat 2 clear airtight glass jars. One brimmed with soybeans, the other half filled with mung beans. 2. She'd ordered the 2-liter jars online for her mother, who loved blending soybean milk in her blender each morning, hence the soybeans. The mung beans were reserved for cooling mung bean soup in summer. Staring at the familiar containers, her throat tightened with longing. 4. Before transmigrating, she'd lived a predictable, comfortable life. Any missing goods could be ordered online instantly, surrounded by material plenty. Yet she'd grumbled that life was dull and unexciting. Now trapped in the apocalypse, danger lurked around every corner. 6. Her life hanging by a thread at all times, liable to end as an unburied ghost in the rubble. The quiet, ordinary days with her parents felt like an unattainable fantasy she could never reclaim. 8. She pinched her stinging nose, wiped her eyes, and returned to sorting the kitchen supplies. The cabinet's lower shelf held 2 unopened 10-jean sacks of flour, high-gluten flour on one side, whole wheat on the other. 10. Her mother loved making dumplings, steamed buns, and manta by hand. Her baked goods were light, fluffy, and delicious. Every time Qiangning visited home, she'd leave with a giant bag of them to take back. 12. Recalling the large vat of rice she'd seen a moment earlier, it seemed her mother had gone grocery shopping shortly before she'd transmigrated. New sacks of rice, flour, oil, and grains had been bought, yet none had been cooked yet. 14. Tucked into the corner of the cabinet stood a 10-liter airtight jar, more than half filled with mixed grains for congee. Leaning against the jar sat a 5-liter oil can brimming most of the way with peanut oil. 16. The adjacent cabinet was reserved for fruits and vegetables. Qiangning pulled it open and sorted through the produce inside. There was 1 Chinese cabbage, 5 or 6 potatoes, 3 onions, 2 lettuce stalks, 2 white radishes, 3 eggplants, 5 or 6 mini cucumbers. 18. A bunch of green onions, a mesh sack of ginger, a bag of garlic, plus a medium-sized pumpkin. It looked like enough groceries to feed a family for a full week. 20. The lower shelf held 2 baskets, one packed with crisp persimmons and the other with sugar tangerines. 21. Both were abundantly filled, completely occupying the bottom of the cabinet. The storage cabinet above the gas stove housed seasonings. Her mother must have spent hours scrolling short video apps. 23. Judging by the 10 packs of salt stockpiled there. Beyond the salt, the selection was complete, if modest in quantity. There was light soy sauce, dark soy sauce, black vinegar, white sugar, rock sugar, oyster sauce, chicken bouillon. 25. Monosodium glutamate, cooking wine, starch, dried chili peppers, Sichuan peppercorns, star anise, cinnamon sticks, bay leaves, fennel seeds, and ground pepper. A small bottle of sesame oil sat tucked away in another corner. 27. The sheer abundance of supplies filled Qiangning with uncontainable excitement. She stood up again to check the refrigerator. No leftover meals filled the fresh compartment on the fridge's upper level. Instead, it held several cans of beer. 29. A jar of rice wine, a pot of honey, a bucket of yogurt, a bunch of garland chrysanthemums, a bundle of lettuce, and a tray of eggs. The freezer section below contained 6 drawers. 4 were crammed full of cured pork sausages, salted bacon, and smoked meat. 31. Her mother had prepared the previous winter. The other 2 drawers held homemade dumplings and steamed buns her mother had wrapped. 32. All in all, the refrigerator was stuffed to capacity. Her mother had even made use of the space beside the kitchen sink, where several pickling crocks lined the counter. 34. These antique vessels had been passed down through generations, older than Qiangning herself. Qiangning lifted one lid to peek inside. One crock held broad bean paste brewed by her mother each summer, still more than half full. 36. The other contained homemade fermented bean curd, with only a small portion remaining. After tallying all the kitchen provisions, only 4 words echoed in Qiangning's mind. "Thank you, Mom." 38. Finished inspecting the kitchen, Qiangning headed for the dining room pantry, following her family's habit of storing snacks there. Her mother always stowed all purchased snacks inside this cabinet. The crackers she'd pulled out of her spatial storage earlier were undoubtedly from this stock. 40. The pantry held plenty of snacks, all the loose-weight varieties favored by the elderly. There was a giant bag of old-fashioned soft bread, a large pack of crackers, a jar of raisins, a sack of sunflower seeds. 42. A big bundle of 5-pack instant noodles, and a half-empty pack of ham sausages with 6 sticks left. Aside from the instant noodles and sausages, every other treat had almost certainly been weighed out by the caddy at the decades-old town shop. 44. That shop had been running for nearly 20 years. Just as the slip of paper had said, every item in the old house was the regular stock. Her family kept on hand before her transmigration. There was a little bit of everything, yet not an overabundance of any single thing. 46. Since her parents cooked at home and had a habit of stockpiling supplies, they possessed far more edible goods than young people, who lived on nothing but snacks in bare apartments. Even so, if she and Achi subsisted solely on what the space contained, their stores would run dry in roughly 2 months. 48. Dreaming of stockpiles weighing hundreds or thousands of gene, even tons of supplies like those in post-apocalyptic hoarding novels, was nothing more than fantasy. She had no desire to gnaw on dried mushrooms plain, yet hauling all these loose snacks out into the open would be far too risky. 50. Rummaging through the house, she found several plastic resealable bags and a hair straightener, which she used to portion and seal the bread and crackers. After fussing over the packaging for ages. 52. Qiangning split the soft bread into 16 separate bags, 1 loaf apiece. She divided the crackers into 8 portions, enough for 1 serving per person per meal. The instant noodle wrappers bore brand logos and production dates, so she repackaged those in her resealable bags as well. 54. Just as she planned to check the household clothing and hardware tools next, Achi's voice called out, "Wake up, Sister Ning, wake up." The vision of the old house around her faded rapidly, and Qiangning opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Achi crouching beside her. 56. His young face etched with anxiety. "What's wrong?" Qiangning sat bolt upright and whispered sharply. Achi nodded toward the sewer shaft. "Someone's coming." Clear voices drifted down from above the shaft. 58. First came the soft clink of metal hitting stone, followed by the scraping grind as the stone block plugging the sewer was pried loose and dragged across the ground. "Who's there?" Terrified of being discovered, Qiangning dropped her voice to an even fainter murmur, leaning carefully to Achi's ear. 60. I don't know. Probably men from Hope Base tracking us down. Achi shook his head and pulled out a small pocket knife. "It's no wonder they're chasing us relentlessly, not with your abilities, Sister Ning." 62. Qiangning felt a surge of embarrassment. She did not even know yet if the original body was the sacrificial offering the base had put a bounty on. What's more, her spatial storage was a transmigration gift, having nothing to do with the original girl. 64. Still, she could not tell Achi any of this. She stood and walked to the bottom of the sewer shaft, craning her neck to stare upward. The heavy stone block atop the shaft slowly shifted under the leverage of a crowbar. The men working above made no effort to conceal their voices. 66. Talking freely without fear of being overheard. "Is there really someone down there?" "Old man, you aren't lying to me, are you?" "Absolutely. Look at this half footprint, fresh as can be." Judging by the size, it's either a woman or a kid. 68. If we catch them, we'll strike it rich this time. The base needs sacrifices for the ritual, and rare captives like this are exactly what they're after. Whoa, you're right. That stone blocked the wind, so the print stayed intact. Sharp eyes you've got, old-timer. 70. Qi Yingning's skin crawled with dread. These men were not the specialized hunters from Hope Base Qi had suspected. Yet their intentions were just as malicious. Qi had already told her about Hope Base's twisted practices earlier. 72. The mention of the base and sacrificial offerings confirmed they were its members without a doubt. They had tracked her and Qi down simply because half a footprint had been preserved beneath the stone block. 74. No one could have foreseen such a thing before the apocalypse. Qi Yingning glanced over at Qi. The boy had pulled on a face mask and goggles, gripping his knife tight in one hand, ready for a fight. 76. She wasted no time putting on the same protective gear, then returned to the horizontal sewer tunnel, and packed every scrap of supplies on the ground into her spatial storage without a trace left behind. 78. After a moment's thought, she pulled a fish spear out of the old house's storage space. She had not yet sorted and tallied all the tools in her space, but having lived in that house for over 20 years. 80. She knew roughly what equipment it held. Her father was an avid angler, his fishing skills were mediocre. Yet he owned an extensive collection of tackle. Hunting and fishing went hand in hand, and since the old house sat out in the village. 82. The family owned multiple hoes and rakes, not to mention the fish spear. Length meant advantage in close combat. And this spear was perfect for someone with zero martial training like her. All she had to do was stab when enemies drew near. 84. Qi had repositioned himself, melting into the shadows lining the sewer shaft. Seeing this, Qi Yingning retrieved a flashlight she'd kept for power outages years prior from her space. 86. Confirming it still worked, she snuffed out their torch, plunging the sewer into complete darkness. 87. She felt her way over to Qi's side, and together they peered up toward the shaft opening. The grating scrape of the shifting stone block echoed once more. Half the shaft entrance slid open, forming a clean semicircle. 89. Torchlight spilled down from above, eerily resembling moonlight. Qi breathed barely loud enough for her to hear. Only 2 of them. We kill them. Qi Yingning stowed the flashlight and wrapped both hands firmly around the fish spear, her palms slick with nervous sweat. 91. This would be her first planned ambush, facing direct combat head-on. Her 2 prior escapes from pursuit had been harrowing. And she had taken lives before, yet those deaths had been unplanned accidents, brought about by crushing foes with a heavy concrete slab. 93. No direct physical confrontation required. Now, the sewer was cramped, blocked by collapsed debris at both ends. She could not rely on her old tactics. If a fight broke out, she would have to engage them blade to blade. 95. Would she really have to kill with her own hands? Could she even beat them? Her heart hammered wildly, and the spear felt impossibly heavy in her grasp. Before she could steel herself further, a small smoking object came tumbling down from above. 97. Get down. Qi shouted, lunging forward and tackling Qi Yingning flat to the ground. 98. Peals of laughter erupted overhead immediately. Told you there was someone down there. Shit, they had grenades? Would they die in the blast? Qi Yingning's mind went blank. 100. She lay prone beside Qi, plugging her ear canals with 2 fingers, bracing for a deafening explosion. 101. No blast came. Instead, thick acrid smoke billowed out, filling every inch of the sewer tunnel. Whatever chemical filled the smoke burned fiercely in the throat and nose, even behind her mask and goggles. 103. Qi Yingning could not suppress a fit of coughing. Sounds like a woman. What a rare catch. Bring her back to the base, and we'll definitely earn major merit. The voice drifted down again. Qi Yingning covered her mouth and nose, glaring upward in rage. 105. Flickering torchlight silhouetted the 2 men above the shaft. They were in high spirits, their voices rising at the ends of their sentences. Reckless with overconfidence, they leaned their faces close to the opening and called down, "Climb out if you want to live." 107. Qi Yingning held her breath, raised the fish spear to align with the semicircular opening, and drove it hard straight toward one round head. A blood-curdling shriek split the air above, followed by enraged screaming, "Damn that bitch. She stabbed me in the ear with something. Kill them both." 109. She had aimed for his eye and missed by inches. Qi Yingning clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle quiet coughs. She had no idea what kind of smoke bomb they'd thrown down. The haze spread fast yet lingered stubbornly. 111. The stinging fumes were pure torment. Was there poison in the smoke? Her head swam dizzily, and she shook it hard to clear her foggy thoughts. At that very moment, Achi clamped his knife between his teeth and began scaling the narrow sewer shaft silently upward. 113. Watch out. Qingning parted her lips to yell, then swallowed the warning back down. 114. Achi clearly intended to strike by surprise. If she shouted and gave him away, both the boy and herself would pay the price. Achi moved as nimbly as a gecko, climbing effortlessly up the shaft wall until he neared the opening. 116. He reclaimed his knife in one hand, adjusting his stance carefully. Then the man guarding the shaft shouted. Malice and amusement thick in his tone. One's coming up. Haha, old man, you were dead right. 118. A thick crowbar forged from twisted steel bars jabbed down through the opening. Its sharpened tip, as deadly as a military dagger, lunged straight for Achi as he swung upward, hauling himself toward the exit with arm strength alone. 120. Qingning thrust her fish spear upward toward the opening without hesitation. She possessed no combat training and little climbing ability, leaving her with limited options in this fight. But Achi's life hung in the balance, and she would protect him however she could. 122. A curse roared from outside the shaft, and the crowbar veered off course. Achi narrowly dodged the metal strike, snatching the sharp tip of the crowbar in one hand to hang suspended at the opening. But he was still a child. 124. Underfed ever since the apocalypse began, thin and slight. The burly man outside dragged the crowbar, hauling Achi steadily toward the shaft exit. This was a disaster. If they pulled him out, the two men would gang up on him, and he would not stand a chance. 126. Qingning watched in frantic helplessness. She wished she could leap up and grab hold of Achi, yet the shaft stretched far too high for her to reach. An idea suddenly struck her. She pulled out the flashlight and flicked it on, blasting searing bright light straight into the eyes of the man leaning over the opening. 128. Ah. My eyes. A scream echoed down, followed by a dull groan. A heartbeat later, Achi dropped lightly back down beside her. Eyes adjusted to pitch black, went temporarily blind when hit with sudden harsh light, and Achi had seized the perfect opening to attack. 130. You. What's wrong with you, you? A frantic scream echoed from above. Achi glanced up at the shaft opening, only to break into a coughing fit from the lingering smoke before he could speak. I slit his throat. He won't make it. 132, he whispered between coughs. Qingning said nothing. She pulled a folding ladder out of her spatial storage and propped it diagonally against the shaft wall. This was the best part of the old rural house passed down through generations. It was stocked with every tool imaginable. 134, nearly anything she needed could be retrieved from the space. Since she could not climb the shaft by skill alone, the ladder would serve just as well. Achi stared at the ladder in stunned disbelief. Do you carry a treasure chest with you? 136. Qingning shook her head, lowering her voice through the smoke. We can't let the other man escape to report us. 137. I'll climb up first and stow the stone block, then we strike when he least expects it. Achi understood instantly, once again demonstrating his skill at climbing smooth vertical walls. 139. Qingning ascended the ladder to the opening, steadying the half-shifted massive stone block with one hand and nodding at Achi. Achi gripped his knife in one hand, pushed off the shaft wall with his feet, and lunged out through the opening. 141. At the exact same time, Qingning swept the stone block into her spatial storage. The entrance yawned wide open. Achi slipped out of the sewer with fluid ease, and Qingning climbed out behind him, steadying herself on the ladder. 143. She had grown fully adept at using her storage by now, and once clear of the tunnel, she tucked the ladder away as well. The flashlight's harsh beam lit the ground beside the sewer mouth, where one man lay gasping his last breaths. 145. A second figure stumbled a short distance away, scrambling to flee in terror. Achi sprinted after him and tackled the man to the ground from behind. The fugitive never managed a meaningful struggle. By the time Achi stood back up, the man lay motionless. Qingning stood frozen beside the sewer, watching Achi's swift, ruthless kill. 2. She had assumed someone as young as Achi could only survive the apocalypse relying on a group and Jiang Ran's protection. She never imagined the boy wielded far greater combat prowess than she'd guessed. 4. Achi wiped sweat from his forehead on the cuff of his cotton jacket and walked toward her, a faint smile in his voice. We won. Yeah, we won. Chi Yingning murmured, half speaking to Achi, half lost in her own thoughts. 6. She looked down at the first man Achi had slit, barely clinging to life on the ground. He wore a face mask, and a faded flame emblem marked the sleeve of his winter coat. 8. He was a member of Hope Base, duped by the delusion spun by their self-proclaimed divine messenger. He had bullied and terrorized countless people across Ning City, convinced he was a chosen one destined to survive the end of the world. 10. Even knowing all the evil he had committed, Chi Yingning's heart ached at the sight of his dying form. Humans were flawed creatures, prone to fantasy, vulnerable to brainwashing, quick to believe they were special, to trust in omnipotent gods. 12. Especially when trapped in hopeless despair. If the apocalypse had never come, he might have been someone's husband, someone's father, an ordinary law-abiding citizen. But the world had collapsed, a brutal law of the jungle where only strength mattered, kill or be killed. 14. He had become just another desperate survivor, disposable cannon fodder for Hope Base. His eyes remained wide open, fixed unblinkingly on Chi Yingning as he drew his final breath. 16. Achi stepped to her side and glanced down at the corpse. Toss him back into the sewer. We won't ever go down there again. Chi Yingning nodded in agreement. A thick toxic haze still blanketed the world outside the sewer. 18. They pulled their masks and goggles back into place, then dragged both bodies down into the tunnel. Using the convenience of her spatial storage, Chi Yingning hauled chunks of broken concrete rubble to seal the sewer entrance shut. 20. This counted as a burial, she thought silently. Let's go. Achi lent a hand with the rubble, speaking softly once the shaft was completely covered. 22. Ning City is no longer safe for us. We leave the city now. Chi Yingning nodded and dimmed the flashlight to its lowest brightness setting. 24. Do you know which road leads out of town? She asked quietly. That way. We'll take a detour to steer clear of Hope Base's territory. Achi pointed toward a distant stretch of road and led Chi Yingning away from the city limits. 26. They walked one behind the other. Achi's steps were light and nimble, while Chi Yingning struggled terribly with the broken, potholed roads of the apocalypse. Thankfully, Achi would turn back every now and then to give her a hand. 28. A sickly yellow smog and piles of rubble stretched on endlessly all around them. They had walked for what felt like ages before Chi Yingning's stomach let out a loud growl. 30. The sound seemed to flip some hidden switch, for Achi's stomach rumbled right after hers. Let's stop for something to eat. Chi Yingning glanced at Achi. Even through his mask and goggles, exhaustion clung to every inch of his frame. 32. She quickly did the math. At minimum, 2 full days and nights had passed since she'd transmigrated to this world. In that span, they'd been fending off sudden attacks nonstop. Neither she nor Achi had gotten any real rest. 34. We haven't cleared Ning City's borders yet. We leave the second we finish eating. Achi hesitated, then nodded. They found a concealed spot, checked thoroughly to make sure no one lingered nearby, and sat down. 36. Achi drove a torch into the dirt, and Chi Yingning pulled out a bottle of water and a pack of cookies, holding them out to him. Eat first. Only with a full belly can we cover more ground. 38. Achi stared at the cookies in shock. You still have something this precious? He took the water bottle, then pushed her hand holding the cookies away. Put these away. Cookies are far too valuable, I can't take them. 40. Eat them. Chi Yingning met his gaze, her tone unyielding. This journey won't get any easier, and we're burning through massive stamina. Eat well, or we'll have no strength left when trouble hits. 42. Achi hesitated, his voice soft and shy. Fine then. Thank you, Sister Ning. Just as Achi reached for the cookies, a lazy drawl drifted over from the side. Fancy finding cookies this late in the game. You two live pretty well, huh? 44. How is this possible? They'd searched the area thoroughly just moments ago. There hadn't been a soul in sight. Chi Yingning shuddered and whipped her head toward the voice. 46. A man pushed himself up from the shadows of the rubble. He wore no mask or goggles. His hair matted into tangled clumps, his face caked in grime, his jaw covered in unkempt stubble. 48. Even in such ragged disarray, his sharp, well-defined features were plain to see. Most striking were his eyes. Half hidden beneath filthy locks, they still blazed bright, as if a fierce fire burned deep inside them. 50. He stood, shuffling forward in a pair of tattered shoes, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Can I have some? Achi shot to his feet in an instant, drawing a small knife and stepping between Qi Yingning and the stranger. Stay back. Don't make me hurt you. 52. The man paid him no mind, picking idly accessorizing at his ear and chuckling. Tough talk for such a kid. A woman and a boy, you won't stand a chance against more than one stranger. He glanced at Qi Yingning and shrugged. 54. If I were you, I'd lose the attitude. The bitter cold of the apocalypse forced everyone to layer thick clothing, hiding all traces of body shape. 56. Helmets and goggles masked faces, making it nearly impossible to tell men from women without stripping down. How had he known she was female? Qi Yingning frowned, sizing the man up. 58. Alone in the wasteland, no protective gear on his person, he looked exactly as she had when she first transmigrated here. No, not quite the same. She'd arrived barefoot, clad in rags barely fit to wear. 60. This man, though filthy and down on his luck, wore heavy, sturdy layers. Worse still, they'd swept every nook before sitting down, yet they'd completely missed him. 62. Where had he hidden? Had he watched her pull supplies out of her spatial storage? She'd been far too careless. Seeing Qi's unwavering hostility, the man made no move to advance further. 64. He stepped back a few paces and hauled a pair of thick leather boots out from the rubble, holding them high in the air. I won't take your food for nothing. I'll trade these for it. 66. Qi's grip on the knife trembled, his knuckles whitening around the hilt. Get lost. We don't want them. Then what do you want? I'll go fetch it for you. The man set the boots aside, his gaze fixed greedily on the cookies in Qi Yingning's hands. 68. He rubbed his palms together, glancing back at her. What other good food do you have stashed in your spatial space? He'd seen it after all. Qi Yingning's face drained of color. 70. Without a second's pause, Qi lunged at the man, knife raised. In the next heartbeat, the man twisted his arm behind his back and bent him double, pinning him effortlessly. 72. You've still got a lot to learn, kid. The man held Qi subdued with ease, plucking the knife from his grasp unhurriedly. I warned you not to act reckless. 74. Stop, let him go. Qi Yingning heard her own voice crack. The man twirled Qi's knife between his fingers and shot her a grin. Will you hand over the cookies for his freedom? 76. Don't listen to him, Sister Ning. Qi strained against the hold, thrashing wildly. He'd broken free from restraints before, boosted by his enhanced strength. 78. But the man's hands clamped around his arms like giant iron vices. No matter how hard he strained, he couldn't break free of a single one of the man's grips. I'll give you the cookies, just release Qi. Qi Yingning lifted the pack, gesturing for him to take it. 80. Qi was shoved back toward her. A blur of shadow or a gust of wind swept past, and the cookies vanished from her grasp. The disheveled man had already settled back into his original spot, tearing open the pack and shoveling cookies into his mouth greedily. 82. Are you hurt? Qi Yingning steadied Qi, checking him carefully for injuries. Qi shook his head. Dark purple bruises bloomed on both wrists, but no fresh wounds marked his skin. 84. The man devoured the cookies in record time, not sparing even the crumbs. He upturned the empty wrapper and shook every last fragment into his mouth. 86. Only when the bag was completely clean did he lift his head, disappointment etched across his features as he looked back at Qi Yingning. Any more? Qi Yingning shook her head. That's all. 88. She'd only felt wary of him before, but now wariness curdled into outright dread. Qi was no match for him, his strength far outstripped anything they could handle. 90. If this man set his sights on them, they had no way of knowing what lay ahead unless they found a permanent way to shake him off. Should she find a way to kill him? Qi Yingning pondered the thought. 92. The man laid the thick leather boots back on the ground and smiled, looking utterly harmless. I won't eat your food for free. If you need an extra pair of hands, I'll work for you. 94. Qi Yingning stared at the boots on the dirt, a chill running down her spine. She'd only been in the apocalypse 2 days, yet her mind had already twisted to match this cruel world's logic. 96. The man had never acted maliciously. He'd only restrained Qi after the boy attacked first. And still, she'd immediately begun plotting his death. 98. She looked at his scuffed, loose shoes and asked, Is food really all you're after? The man nodded. Since the end of the world, I haven't eaten a single proper meal. Nothing but bugs, sawdust, even mud. 100. You've got spatial storage. Feed me halfway decent food, and I'll stick with you. Qi Yingning knit her brows tight, silently kicking herself. 102. It seemed everyone had caught wind of spatial powers ever since she'd arrived. The second anyone watched supplies materialize out of thin air in her hands, they instantly jumped to the same conclusion. 104. Never entertaining a single other possibility. Were people really this quick to accept supernatural abilities? She regretted rushing off without packing backpacks to hide her storage earlier. 106. She'd thought only Achi and herself would be around, yet someone else had caught her red-handed. Now she had to seriously weigh what to do with this stranger. Should she let him join their group? She hesitated. 108. Don't trust him, Sister Ning. Achi shook his head sharply beside her, voice firm. He lowered his tone. Back when our old team had it good, loads of strangers begged to join by playing the victim. 110. Our leader was soft-hearted and took plenty of them in. But some only wanted to steal our leader's livestock farming techniques. Others were far worse. 112. They plotted with outside raiders to wipe us out, turning our leader into nothing more than their livestock breeder. Qiangning instantly understood his point. No laws governed the apocalypse, no authorities to enforce order. 114. People would resort to anything to survive. Some claimed human nature was inherently kind, others said it was cruel. But kindness or cruelty were merely choices people made under desperate circumstances. 116. This boy had fought to survive through the wasteland's horrors, far more vigilant than she was. The man laughed, pushing to his feet and clapping his hands as if applauding Achi. 118. Smart kid, staying alert to survive out here. But you're missing one critical detail. Qiangning's heart skipped. She gently shook her head at Achi, pulling him back beside her. 120. Do you have other companions? She called out to the man. Nope, just me. He raised both hands to signal he meant no harm. 122. We're leaving the city. Would you still follow us? Qiangning pressed. Sure, why not? I've got no one else. Anywhere's as good as anywhere else. The man slouched, speaking casually. 124. Qiangning nodded and held out a hand toward him. Very well. Come with us. Sister Ning? Achi cried out anxiously. 126. Qiangning paid him no heed, her palm closing around the man's. Qiangning, she introduced herself shortly. 128. Yu Huaichuan. His reply was equally concise. This is Jiangqi, I call him Achi. After they shook hands, she turned to the boy. 130. He looked dejected, head hung low, not uttering a word. Qiangning patted his shoulder. I know you're only looking out for my safety. Achi spun away from her, grumbling. Then why agree to team up with him? 132. Yu Huaichuan shuffled over in his worn shoes and sat casually beside Achi, meeting his eyes. Even if you'd refuse me, what could you two have done to stop me? 134. Achi's anger flared hotter, twisting away again, drawing a soft chuckle from Yu Huaichuan. Kid, I don't know who your old leader was or what farming secret he guarded. But think about it. 136. All those people who begged to join your team by pretending to be destitute, weren't they all weaker than your group? Achi snapped his head around, shooting him a sharp glare. Not all of them. Some were weak, but the teams that tried to swallow us whole were far stronger. 138. Was your group large? Yeah, we had plenty of people. 140. Yu Huaichuan nodded in understanding. Back when you had numbers, even stronger raider crews would have paid a steep price to take you down. But I'm different. The two of you together can't beat me. If I'd forced the issue and threatened you. 142. The end result would have been you dead, and Qiangning locked away by me. Yu Huaichuan's mouth watered as he spoke. I could have just waited quietly until she starved, then snatched every bit of food she pulled out of her storage. 144. Achi fell silent, glaring at Yu Huaichuan but unable to refute his words. Amused by the boy's frustration, Yu Huaichuan pulled out the knife he'd seized earlier and tossed it back. 146. We're teammates now. Take it back. If you still see me as a threat, train harder. If you land a sneak attack on me, that's your win. Achi stuffed the knife away crossly, saying nothing more. 148. Qiangning sat down beside them. Yu Huaichuan spoke the truth. With his strength, he could have easily overpowered both her and Achi. That was the main reason she'd agreed to let him tag along. 150. She could have repeated the trick she'd pulled in the basement, hurling a massive stone slab or the multi-ton concrete road barrier to catch him off guard. But Yu Huaichuan's reflexes were too sharp. She feared a failed strike would leave her vulnerable to retaliation. 152. More than that, though, she was scared of herself. The chaos and horror of the apocalypse warped every part of a person. 154. Danger and endless competition turned people brutal and distrustful, erasing every trace of pre-apocalyptic civility. Even she, only 2 days into this world, had instinctively jumped to violent solutions. 156, and Yu Huaichuan had never meant them harm from the start. So she wanted to find out, did he truly want an alliance, or did he harbor darker plans? 158, she needed to see if any shred of humanity still lingered in this broken wasteland. Ignoring the tense, awkward air between Yu Huaichuan and Achi, she pulled 3 more packs of cookies and set them between the 2 boys. 160, Sister Ning, you have more cookies? Achi gasped, shaking his head firmly. Dried mushrooms are enough for us. Don't waste something this rare. 162, eat them. Ning pressed the cookies into his hands. We still have to get out of the city. Mushrooms alone won't give us enough stamina. Achi took the pack, eyes glistening, and nibbled slowly. 164, Yu Huaichuan showed no such restraint. He grabbed a pack, tore it open, and commented without hesitation. Terrible sealing job on these wrappers. She'd used a hair straightener to seal them shut. Of course the edges looked messy. 166, Ning rolled her eyes and pulled out several bottles of water. Don't choke. A twinge of regret tugged at her. When she'd entered her spatial storage earlier, she'd only focused on sorting bread and cookies. 168, forgetting to stock extra water bottles. The old house inside her storage had its perks, but this was its flaw. Tap water ran freely inside, yet she could only bring it out once poured into containers. 170, she couldn't conjure water directly from storage, otherwise, she might have pretended to be a water element ability user. Yu Huaichuan bit into a few cookies, his eyes crinkling with pure bliss. This is amazing. I haven't tasted pre-apocalypse food in years. 172, wait a minute, these cookies are crisp, not stale like they'd be after years of storage. He snapped his head up, staring intently at Ning, one hand gesturing wildly. 174, is your spatial storage like the ones in novels? Does time stand still inside, keeping food fresh forever? Ning's heart lurched. She had no answer for that question. 176, she'd only been here 2 days. She'd barely confirmed she couldn't physically step into her storage space. And only checked the supplies once while hiding in the sewers, confirming running water, electricity, and gas waited inside. 178, as for time flow or food preservation within the space. She had no clue whatsoever. 179, it had only been 2 days, even fresh vegetables wouldn't rot that fast. Still faced with Yu Huaichuan's eager, expectant gaze, she knew she had to respond. My storage doesn't preserve food. Ning's answer was sharp and unhesitating. Honestly, I have no idea how long these cookies have been inside. I've lost my memory. I only remember events from before the apocalypse. For me, the end of the world only started 3 days ago. She nodded toward Achi. He can vouch for that. Every word was the complete truth, no lies at all. Yu Huaichuan stared at her in disbelief, then glanced at Achi. How do I know you two aren't teaming up to fool me? Why would we lie about something like that? Ning shrugged, pulling down her mask and goggles. Then tearing open the last pack of cookies to eat. Yu Huaichuan's gaze locked onto her face at once. Ning's pulse raced. Back in the basement, a man had choked her, damaging her throat. Her voice remained hoarse, ambiguous enough to blur the line between male and female. Did this man have malicious intentions toward her now that he saw her true face? You're the one the Hope Base put a bounty out for, aren't you? Yu Huaichuan's stare never left her. The sacrifice they're hunting. Ning froze. When she'd first met Achi and his old leader in the apartment, they'd immediately assumed she was the sacrifice. Hope Base saw it. Now Yu Huaichuan thought the very same thing. Don't tell a soul. Achi had silently drawn his knife again. If you hand Sister Ning over, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth and kill you. Yu Huaichuan laughed, twisting open a water bottle and taking a sip. I already know she has spatial storage. I'd be an idiot to trade her to Hope Base for supplies. Why hand her over when we could build our own faction instead? Achi pointed the knife at Yu Huaichuan, too furious to form full sentences. Kid, put the blade away. Yu Huaichuan wore a half-smirk, side-eyeing Achi without making a move to attack. Ning fell silent, her face hardening. She'd never imagined events would spiral this far out of control. She'd assumed even if Yu Huaichuan realized she was a woman and grew covetous, he'd play the gentleman. For the sake of exploiting her spatial powers for the time being. She never imagined that the identity she'd long pretended to survive, the sacrificial offering the Hope Base had put a bounty on, would now be confirmed right here. What would Yu Huaichuan do next? If he had no intention of handing her over to Hope Base for supplies, would he resort to force to bend her to his will? Chi Yining flexed her fingers, her mind drifting to the immensely heavy stone block stored inside her spatial dimension. Yu Huachuan shot her a glance and slipped a hand into his inner coat. When he pulled it back out, he held a tiny paper packet. "This is for you." He tossed the packet toward her knees. "Consider it my admission fee to join your group." Chi Yining stared blankly at him, letting the packet land on her lap. The turnaround was far too sudden, completely beyond her expectations. "What, you don't want it? This is valuable stuff." Seeing her frozen, Yu Huachuan raised an eyebrow. "Relax. I'm just looking for a trustworthy team." All that talk about building a base was nothing more than idle chatter. Chi Yining bowed her head and picked up the packet from her knees, her mind still racing to figure out her next move. Should she kill him while he wasn't looking? Or sneak away when the chance arose? Distractedly, she unfolded the paper. Tiny brown granules spilled out, resembling dark millet, marked with faint thin grooves across their surfaces. What on earth were these? Chinese cabbage seeds. I found them in an abandoned house a while back. Yu Huachuan stuffed a handful of crackers into his mouth and chewed. They're useless to me alone, but you have a spatial dimension. Storing them there might keep them viable longer. If we get lucky later, we could even grow vegetables from them. Chi Yining stared at the packet of seeds, torn over how to read Yu Huachuan's intentions. Was he genuinely friendly, or dangerously untrustworthy? "How did you know Hope Base put a bounty on me?" She lifted her head and fixed him with a direct gaze. "There's a wanted poster hung at the base's main gate, complete with your photo." Yu Huachuan swallowed his crackers and shrugged. "You've wasted away a lot, but your facial features are still unmistakable." Chi Yining shook her head. It was bitterly ironic. She hadn't laid eyes on her own reflection since transmigrating to this apocalyptic world. Though she'd seen herself in the mirror inside her old house's spatial realm, that reflection showed her pre-transmigration self. Back in the apartment, she'd pretended to be someone else to avoid being killed the moment they met. Yet it turned out that someone else was actually the original body's owner. Her gaze drifted to Aki. The boy had just finished his crackers and was drinking water. When he caught her stare, he looked utterly confused. "Sister Ning, why are you looking at me? Did you also see my wanted photo?" Chi Yining asked. Aki nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Otherwise, how would Boss and I have known to head for Hope Base?" Chi Yining fell silent. So she'd been the only one fooling herself into thinking her disguise held up. No wonder he and Jiang Ran had never doubted her from the start. She rewrapped the cabbage seeds and tucked them into her spatial dimension, weighing how to handle Yu Huachuan. There was no denying his overwhelming strength. Aki stood no chance against him, and neither did she. He'd uncovered her secret spatial power and confirmed her true identity. Should she really team up with a man like this? If there was another option, traveling only with Aki would be far safer. She hesitated. Yu Huachuan finished eating and stood. He walked back to where he'd hidden earlier, bent down, then effortlessly lifted an enormous stone pillar with one arm. Holy hell! Chi Yining's eyes widened in pure shock. The pillar was reinforced concrete, thick and solid, likely weighing nearly as much as the stone block inside her space. He'd hoisted it as casually as if it were a head of cabbage. If conflict erupted, her plan to ambush him with the heavy stone block stood little chance of success. This man was terrifying. Before they'd settled here to rest, Aki had scouted the entire surrounding area. She'd seen Aki fight, having survived 3 years in the apocalypse. The boy possessed sharp reflexes and sharp instincts, far superior to a novice like her who'd only just arrived in this broken world. Yet Yu Huachuan had hidden right under their noses, slipping past Aki's thorough search without a trace. With his back to her, Yu Huachuan set the pillar gently aside and retrieved a drawstring sack tucked beneath it. "Have you two decided where you're heading?" He slung the sack over one shoulder and turned to face them. Chi Yining hesitated, unsure if she should tell the truth. She'd just accepted his cabbage seeds, and it felt wrong to lie to him outright. Worse still, she feared what would happen if his amiable demeanor flipped on a dime. "You still think I'm a malicious villain?" Yu Huachuan chuckled. "It's just how the apocalypse is. No one dares trust anyone. Time will reveal a person's true heart. I'm only seeking a few reliable companions." He seemed sincere about partnering up, and an unexpected twinge of guilt stirred in Chi Yining's chest. "We plan to leave the city," she resolved to speak honestly. "Leave the city?" Yu Huachuan arched his brows in surprise. "There's nothing out there in the wilderness. Why would you two head outside the walls?" Chi Yining forced a bitter smile. You already know Hope Base is offering a reward for my capture. You can guess the reason. I see. Understanding dawned on his face. Do you know what waits beyond the city limits? Shi Yining and Aki both shook their heads. The entire area outside is a barren desert. If you're hiding from Hope Base, traveling far beyond the city perimeter is far safer than lingering near its outskirts. Yu Huachuan's tone turned grave. Aki gaped in disbelief. That can't be. The land outside the city stretches endlessly, with barely any people. How could it all be desert? Yu Huachuan offered no explanation. He glanced up at the sky and spoke abruptly. Dawn's breaking soon. Let's find somewhere to hide first. Once night falls, I'll tell you everything. Shi Yining lifted her gaze to the sky. White streaks were already seeping through the thick haze. Daybreak was near. Seeing neither of them object, Yu Huachuan led the way forward. He carried his sack in one hand, scanning the uneven terrain until they reached a stretch of road cracked apart by earthquakes. He knelt and tapped the pavement. This spot will do. Confused, Shi Yining watched him set down the drawstring sack and pry up a warped slab of road concrete. Beneath the pavement lay a half-collapsed tunnel opening. We'll rest here for the day. Yu Huachuan tossed the concrete slab aside without a second thought. The brittle slab shattered into several jagged pieces on impact. What is this place? Shi Yining stammered, stunned by his casual display of strength. A collapsed sewer tunnel. I've been camping here these past few days. It's cramped, but more than enough to hide the three of us. Noticing the broken concrete, Yu Huachuan glanced left and right before hefting the massive stone pillar over to block the entrance. Shi Yining flinched at the sight of him lifting the pillar and ducked into the tunnel without delay. Aki followed close behind. Yu Huachuan was the last to climb inside. Ever vigilant, he dropped to his hands and knees once inside, hauling the heavy pillar across to seal the tunnel's mouth completely. This sewer was nothing like the one Aki had hidden her in earlier. The ceiling hung low and the passage narrow. Alone, it would barely fit one person to lie down and sleep. With three of them, they could only huddle in separate spots, sitting upright. Aki stuck a torch into the mud floor. Its flickering flame cast faint light across the cramped underground space. How did you find this hiding spot? Shi Yining settled onto the flattest patch of ground and glanced around the tunnel. Sound. Hollow underground spaces echo differently from ground packed solid with dirt. Yu Huachuan answered as he pulled a blanket from his drawstring sack and spread it over the ground. Cities are laced with underground infrastructure, sewers, underground malls, parking garages. Collapses create small cavities like this, perfect for a single survivor to lay low. You can trace sewer lines by following the road layout. Ruined buildings also hint at hidden underground rooms, leading to more shelters like this one. Aki listened, nodding thoughtfully. So if I locate main roads or tall buildings with basements, I can find similar hiding spots? Exactly. Yu Huachuan sat cross-legged on his blanket. We'll rest here until nightfall. He shot a sharp, wary glance at Shi Yining and Aki. Neither of you snore, I hope? Aki and Shi Yining shook their heads in unison. Yu Huachuan looked relieved. Good. If we draw attention with snoring, I'd have to deal with whoever comes investigating. Get some sleep. We've got a long journey once it's dark. He leaned back against the tunnel wall, closed his eyes, and his breathing instantly slowed into a steady rhythm. How could he fall asleep so fast? Wasn't he afraid Aki and I would turn on him? If we fled now, we'd likely get away cleanly. Shi Yining watched his sleeping face, restless thoughts swirling through her mind again. She glanced hesitantly at Aki, only to find the boy staring silently at Yu Huachuan, lost in some distant memory. Was he thinking back to when the boss had rescued him? Helpless, Shi Yining tugged gently at Aki's sleeve and gestured toward the tunnel exit. Aki turned back to her and shook his head. It's far too dangerous outside right now, he whispered in a low voice. Large survivor groups patrol during daylight scavenging for supplies. If we cross paths with them, they'll drag us away, and we'll face an unknown fate. We're better off staying put until night comes. Aki set down one backpack and pulled out his own blanket to spread over the mud. We've got nowhere else to go, let's make do and rest for a while. Shi Yining nodded as Aki extinguished the torch, plunging the tiny shelter into complete darkness. They spread their blankets and leaned half reclined against the curved concrete sewer walls to rest. The air was bitterly cold. The tunnel sat close to the surface, its temperature matching the frigid outdoors. Walking had kept their bodies warm, but now that they'd stopped, the chill seeped straight into their bones. Shi Yining retrieved an old blanket she'd kept for 20 years from her spatial dimension and draped it over herself and Aki. After a moment's hesitation, she tugged the fabric wide enough to cover Yu Huachuan as well. The old house that formed her spatial realm had stood in her family for decades, stocked with thick cotton quilts. But pulling out bulky quilts would draw unwanted attention. Thankfully, the tunnel had no wind, so the thin blanket would hold back the cold well enough. Once settled, Qi Yining closed her eyes and slipped into her spatial dimension. The familiar living room greeted her, windows clean, lights glowing bright. Bundles of firewood she'd stored earlier lined the staircase, and through the living room window, she spotted the heavy gray stone block sitting in the courtyard. She walked to the stairs, pulled out the paper packet of cabbage seeds and tucked it into her coat. Then grabbed her fully charged headlamp before heading into the kitchen. A water purifier had been installed in the kitchen. Qi Yining fetched a large sports water bottle, washed it thoroughly, and filled it with clean filtered water. She'd made up her mind. Once her current supply of bitter, murky rainwater ran out, she'd rely on the purified water from her space. Drinking water was far less conspicuous than food, and its shelf life held up well. By the time she needed to pull it out, she would have judged the true character of her two traveling companions. Next, she found an empty glass canning jar, poured the cabbage seeds inside, and placed the jar in the refrigerator's cold storage compartment. She knew nothing about growing crops, and seeds were an invaluable rarity in the apocalypse. Rather than plant them recklessly and risk ruining them, she planned to read the agricultural books stored in the upstairs study first. A botched planting would leave her with nothing to show for it, and she'd regret it deeply. Beyond that, she hoped to find a way to make hot meals later. She pulled out a metal cooking tripod and grill rack and set them aside. Ever since the asteroid collision, the sun had vanished from the sky, sending global temperatures plummeting. She'd studied maps. Ningqing was considered a southern region, yet the cold remained brutal. Though the water hadn't frozen solid, the temperature hovered barely above 0 degrees Celsius. Every resource was scarce in this ruined world: clean water, electricity, food, firewood, all in short supply. The boss and Aki had stockpiled a decent stack of firewood, yet they hesitated to light fires to stay warm. Most of their wood was burned to make torches for light. Every survival habit had its reason. As an outsider transmigrator, she had no intention of disrupting their routines until she fully understood the rules of this harsh world. Still, she was eager to make their shared hardships a little more bearable. After all, of the three traveling together, Qi Yining was the weakest. The more irreplaceable her supplies and skills became, the safer she would be within the group. What she lacked most was first-hand apocalypse survival experience and knowledge of the past 3 years of ruin. That knowledge could only be gained by interacting with other survivors. She intended to keep her promise and accompany Aki to Yu City. That journey would give her ample time to adapt to this brutal reality. As for once they reached Yu City, Qi Yining had no plans to stay.